Hey everyone, tonight we descend into the deepest shadows of a galaxy far, far away, exploring the most terrifying and fascinating dark side cults that have haunted the Star Wars universe for millennia. These are the forgotten followers, the twisted devotees, and the ancient brotherhoods who served powers beyond imagination. From the cryptic rituals of the Eternal Shadow to the death-worshipping sorcerers of Rand, their stories reveal a web of darkness that spans across time itself. So before we begin this journey into the abyss, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you're genuinely drawn to these tales of cosmic horror and ancient mysteries. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what draws you most to the dark side of this beloved galaxy. It's always incredible to connect with fellow explorers of the unknown. Now settle in, dim those lights, and let your mind prepare for a voyage through shadows that have consumed entire star systems. Get comfortable, because tonight we uncover secrets that the Jedi Order tried desperately to bury. In the furthest reaches of the unknown regions, where stars die young and planets drift like tombstones through endless night, there exists a world called Umbral that appears on no Imperial charts, no Republic records, no Jedi archives. On this world of perpetual twilight, where crimson lightning splits black skies, ancient spires of dark crystal pierce the horizon like accusing fingers pointed at uncaring stars. Within the tallest spire, 13 figures kneel in perfect silence around a pool of liquid darkness that reflects no light, yet reveals truths that would shatter the minds of the uninitiated. These are not Sith Lords, though they serve the dark side with devotion that would make even Darth Sidious pause in recognition. They are something far older, far more patient, and infinitely more dangerous. The 13th figure, whose face remains hidden beneath a hood woven from the night itself, speaks in the ancient Sith tongue. Her words burn themselves into consciousness like brands of pure understanding. She speaks of a prophecy written in starlight and shadow, of a convergence that has been orchestrated across 10,000 years of galactic history. Every fallen Jedi, every corrupted soul, every cult that has ever raised dark altars to forgotten gods, all have been pieces in a vast design, so intricate that even its architects have forgotten their role. But as her words reach their crescendo, as the pool of darkness begins to churn with otherworldly energy, something goes wrong. The ancient ritual encounters an element that was never meant to be there, a presence that should not exist. A variable that transforms everything. The hooded figure stops speaking mid-sentence, her voice cutting off so abruptly that the silence screams with its own voice. Slowly, with movements that suggest barely contained terror, she raises her head toward the crystal dome overhead. Through the swirling clouds of crimson and black, through the cosmic void itself, something is looking back. Something vast and patient and hungry beyond all comprehension. Something that has been waiting in the spaces between stars for this exact moment. The pool of darkness begins to rise, defying gravity and logic, forming itself into shapes that hurt to perceive directly. And in that moment of cosmic horror, as reality itself holds its breath, the hooded figure whispers words that will echo through every moment of our tale. Words that connect every dark side cult, every fallen warrior, every seeker of forbidden knowledge who has ever existed. But what she whispers, what revelation threatens to tear apart the very fabric of space and time, that truth remains locked away in the shadows of our story, waiting to be unveiled as we journey together through the chronicles of darkness that span the ages. What happened in that crystal spire was not the beginning of our tale, but the end of a story that began before the first Jedi drew breath, before the galaxy itself learned to fear what lurks in the darkness between worlds. To understand that whispered revelation, we must start at what most would consider the beginning. Tonight we uncover the hidden histories that connect ancient evils to modern conspiracies, whispered prophecies to galactic catastrophes, Join me as we explore the shadows that bind all darkness together, and perhaps discover what cosmic force has been guiding our galaxy toward some unimaginable purpose for longer than civilizations have existed to record their histories. The year is 38 ABA, 13 years after the final defeat of Emperor Palpatine on Exegol, yet the galaxy has not found the peace it desperately sought. In the aftermath of the Final Order's destruction, strange reports have begun filtering through New Republic intelligence networks, cults emerging from the shadows, ancient symbols appearing on distant worlds, whispered chants in dead languages echoing through abandoned Imperial facilities. The dark side, it seems, refuses to die with its most infamous practitioners. You are Commander Kyle Voss, formerly of Imperial Intelligence, now serving as a specialized archaeological investigator for the New Republic's Department of Historical Preservation. But your true mission extends far beyond cataloging ancient artifacts and forgotten civilizations. You are one of the few individuals in the galaxy tasked with tracking the resurgence of dark side activity, documenting the cults and followers who continue to serve masters both living and dead. Your credentials for this work are written in scars, both visible and hidden. You survived the purges of Imperial intelligence after Endor, witnessed the rise and fall of countless warlords during the chaotic years that followed, and spent decades studying the dark side, not as a practitioner, but as a scholar of its corrupting influence. You have walked through the ruins of Sith academies, interviewed former cultists, and gazed into artifacts that would drive lesser minds to madness. Yet somehow, you have retained your sanity and your humanity, though both have been tested in ways that most beings could never comprehend. Your ship, the modified light freighter Silent Archive, drifts through hyperspace toward your current destination. Its cargo holds filled with detection equipment, archaeological tools, and most importantly, a collection of texts and artifacts that represent one of the galaxy's most comprehensive libraries of dark side knowledge. The ship itself has been your home for the better part of a decade, its walls lined with sealed cases containing holocrons, ancient manuscripts, and ritual objects that you have recovered from dozens of worlds where darkness once held sway. As you emerge from hyperspace above the dead world of Car Delba, one of the lesser-known Sith worlds in the ancient Sith Empire's former territory, you are not alone. Your companions on this particular mission represent the finest expertise the New Republic can provide for such dangerous work. Dr. Lysa Corvain sits at the communications console, her weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency across the controls. At 73 years old, she is one of the galaxy's foremost experts on Sith archaeology, and one of the few beings who has spent more time studying dark side cults than you have. Her silver hair is pulled back in a practical bun, and her pale blue eyes hold the weight of knowledge that few would willingly carry. She was there when the New Republic first began investigating the resurgence of dark side activity, and her research forms the foundation of everything the galaxy knows about how these cults operate and spread their influence. Dr. Corvain's voice carries the authority of someone who has stared into the abyss for decades without blinking. She has interviewed hundreds of former cultists, analyzed thousands of artifacts, and written the definitive texts on no fewer than 17 different dark side organizations. Her work has saved countless lives by providing early warning systems for cult activity, yet she pays a personal price for her knowledge. She rarely sleeps without nightmares, and her dreams are filled with visions of rituals she has never witnessed, but somehow understands with terrifying clarity. Your second companion is a study in contrasts to Dr. Corvain's scholarly approach. Dex Krennic, no relation to the infamous Imperial Director, is a former Imperial Inquisitor who turned against the Empire during the final years of Palpatine's reign. Tall and lean, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that seem to constantly scan for threats, Dex represents the practical, tactical side of your mission. He knows firsthand how dark side organizations recruit, train, and deploy their followers because he was once part of the system that created many of them. Dex's redemption story is one of the most remarkable transformations you have witnessed. Once a hunter of Jedi survivors, he now dedicates his life to preventing others from falling to the corruption that nearly consumed him. His knowledge of Inquisitor training methods, Imperial dark side research, and the psychological techniques used to break and remake individuals in service to the dark side has proven invaluable in understanding how modern cults continue to operate using methods perfected during the Empire's reign. The relationship between your three-person team has been forged through years of shared danger and mutual respect. Dr. Corvain provides the historical context and academic analysis that allows you to understand what you are seeing. Dex provides the tactical awareness and first-hand experience that keeps you alive when academic knowledge is not enough. And you serve as the coordinator and decision-maker, the one who must weigh the value of knowledge against the risk of corruption, who must decide when investigation becomes too dangerous to continue. Your current mission to Car Delba began 3 weeks ago when New Republic intelligence intercepted communications suggesting that someone or something had been excavating the planet's ancient Sith ruins. The communications were brief and heavily encrypted, but they contained references to the Convergence Protocol and mentioned timetables that suggested whatever was happening on Car Delba was part of a larger coordinated effort spanning multiple star systems. The silent archive settles into orbit around the barren world, its sensors immediately detecting signs of recent activity on the planet's surface. Energy readings indicate that someone has been using heavy excavation equipment in the ruins of the ancient Sith Academy, and thermal scans reveal structures that have been recently exposed to the planet's thin atmosphere after millennia of burial. As you study the sensor data, Dr. Corvain's voice cuts through the ship's quiet hum. Her tone carries the weight of recognition tinged with concern. She has seen patterns like this before. Excavation techniques that match profiles from 17 other worlds where dark side cults have been operating. The methodical approach, the focus on specific structures within Sith complexes, the apparent coordination with activities on other worlds, all of it points to an organization with resources, knowledge, and most troubling of all, a plan. Dex approaches the sensor station, his presence immediately shifting the ship's atmosphere from academic analysis to tactical preparation. His experience tells him that whoever has been working on Car Delba's surface is not a random group of treasure hunters or amateur archaeologists. The excavation sites have been chosen with precision that suggests intimate knowledge of Sith architectural principles and the specific locations where the most dangerous artifacts would have been stored. The three of you gather around the holographic display showing Car Delba's surface, the ancient academy ruins now partially exposed by recent excavation work. The scope of the operation below is far larger than initial intelligence reports suggested. Someone has been working on this world for months, possibly years, with resources that suggest backing from a major organization or government. As you prepare to descend to the planet's surface, each of you checks equipment that has been carefully selected for investigating dark side sites. Portable sensors that can detect force energy signatures, recording devices shielded against psychic interference, and most importantly, mental discipline techniques that provide some protection against the corrupting influence that still emanates from ancient Sith strongholds even after millennia of abandonment. Your investigation of Car Delba will be the first step in a journey that will take you across the galaxy, through the hidden histories of cults both ancient and modern, and ultimately toward an understanding of the cosmic conspiracy that connects every seeker of forbidden knowledge who has ever gazed into the darkness and found something gazing back. The truth you seek lies buried in ruins older than the Republic itself, guarded by secrets that have corrupted civilizations and toppled empires. And somewhere in those ruins, you will find the first clues that will lead you back to that crystal spire on Umbral, to 13 hooded figures, and to the whispered revelation that threatens to unravel everything you thought you knew about the nature of the dark side itself. The descent through Car Delba's atmosphere felt like falling through layers of forgotten time itself. The planet's thin air carried whispers of ancient power, and as the silent archive touched down on the cracked Duracat landing pad near the excavation site, Commander Karl Voss could feel the weight of millennia pressing against his consciousness. This world had been touched by darkness so profound that even after 3,000 years of abandonment, the very stones remembered the screams of those who had walked its halls in pursuit of forbidden knowledge. The landing pad itself told a story of recent activity that contradicted every intelligence report the New Republic had received about this supposedly dead world. Heavy machinery had left deep tracks in the ancient stone, and temporary structures dotted the landscape around the partially excavated Sith Academy. Someone had been working here with industrial-level equipment and a workforce large enough to move massive stone blocks that had sealed the Academy's deepest chambers for millennia. Dr. Corvain was the first to step onto the planet's surface, her portable sensors already sweeping the area for energy signatures that might indicate the presence of active dark side artifacts. The readings she gathered in those first moments painted a picture that made even her experienced mind recoil with concern. The excavation had not been random treasure hunting, but a methodical surgical extraction of specific items from very particular locations within the Academy complex. The ancient Sith Academy of Car Delba had been built according to principles that most modern architects would consider impossible. The structure seemed to fold in on itself in ways that defied conventional understanding of three-dimensional space, with corridors that led to chambers larger than the buildings that contained them, and staircases that descended far deeper into the planet's crust than should have been physically possible. This was architecture designed not merely to house students and teachers, but to channel and amplify the dark side of the Force itself. As the team made their way through the Academy's outer chambers, Dex Krennic's tactical training proved invaluable in reading the signs of the recent excavation. The workers who had been here possessed detailed knowledge of Sith construction techniques and had known exactly where to dig to access the Academy's most sensitive areas. They had bypassed dozens of chambers filled with relatively mundane artifacts and training equipment to focus exclusively on the deep vaults where the Academy's masters had stored their most dangerous experiments and forbidden research. The first major discovery came in what had once been the Academy's central meditation chamber, a vast circular room where young Sith apprentices had once learned to touch the dark side of the Force under the guidance of masters whose names were now forgotten by all but the most dedicated scholars of ancient history. The chamber's walls were covered with inscriptions in the ancient Sith language, but these were not the usual training mantras or philosophical treatises that one might expect to find in such a place. Instead, the inscriptions spoke of something called the Convergence Protocol, a concept that appeared nowhere in any known Sith texts, but which seemed to be referenced with a reverence typically reserved for the most sacred dark side rituals. The inscription suggested that the Convergence Protocol was not merely a single ritual or ceremony, but rather an overarching plan that had been developed and refined over thousands of years by successive generations of dark side practitioners. According to the fragmentary inscriptions that remained legible after millennia of decay, the Convergence Protocol involved the coordinated awakening of dark side nexus points across the galaxy, each one timed to create what the texts called a resonance cascade that would fundamentally alter the balance between light and dark throughout the known universe. The scale of such an undertaking would require resources and coordination far beyond what any single Sith Lord or dark side cult could hope to achieve alone. But as Dr. Corvain continued to translate the ancient inscriptions, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. The texts made repeated references to the watchers between stars and those who sleep in the spaces beyond light, suggesting that the convergence protocol was not entirely a creation of terrestrial dark side practitioners, but had been influenced or perhaps even dictated by entities operating from outside the galaxy itself. The deeper chambers of the Academy revealed evidence of excavation techniques that were both sophisticated and desperate. Whoever had been working here had possessed advanced archaeological equipment and detailed knowledge of Sith construction principles, but they had also been working under severe time constraints. Tool marks on the stone walls showed signs of hasty work, and several chambers had been partially collapsed during the extraction process, suggesting that the excavators had been more concerned with speed than with preserving the historical integrity of the site. In what had once been the Academy's archive chamber, the team discovered the first direct evidence of what the recent excavators had been seeking. The chamber's walls were lined with empty alcoves that had once held holocrons, ancient texts, and ritual artifacts. But the pattern of missing items was not random. Someone had taken very specific pieces of a larger puzzle, leaving behind items that would have been incredibly valuable to collectors or even casual dark side practitioners, while focusing exclusively on materials related to something called the Eternal Binding. The Eternal Binding, according to the few references that remained in the chamber's damaged inscriptions, was described as the foundational ritual upon which the entire convergence protocol depended. Without a complete understanding of the Eternal Binding, the other elements of the protocol would remain merely theoretical exercises rather than practical applications of dark side power. The fact that someone had been systematically collecting Eternal Binding materials from multiple archaeological sites suggested a level of knowledge and preparation that had been developing for decades, if not centuries. As the investigation continued deeper into the Academy's lower levels, the team began to encounter evidence of the dark side's continued presence in the ruins. Chambers that should have been dead stone and empty air still thrummed with malevolent energy, and Dex's experience as a former Inquisitor allowed him to recognize the signs of recent dark side rituals that had been performed in the ancient spaces. Someone had not merely been excavating artifacts from this site, but had been using the Academy's power-amplifying architecture to conduct ceremonies that would have been impossible to perform safely in any other location. The ritual chambers in the Academy's deepest levels revealed the most disturbing evidence of all. Fresh burn marks on ancient stone altars indicated that sacrificial ceremonies had been performed within the past few months, and the lingering psychic impressions in the Force suggested that these had not been mere symbolic offerings, but genuine attempts to contact and communicate with entities that existed beyond the normal boundaries of space and time. Dr. Corvain's analysis of the ritual sites revealed a pattern of increasing desperation and escalating stakes in the ceremonies that had been performed. The earliest ritual evidence suggested relatively standard dark side practices, the kind of ceremonies that ambitious cultists might perform in hopes of gaining power or knowledge. But the more recent evidence indicated rituals of a complexity and danger that would have challenged even experienced Sith Lords, suggesting that whoever was behind the excavation had been building towards something of enormous significance. The final chamber that the team investigated before leaving Cardelba was the Academy's former council chamber, where the Academy's masters had once met to discuss the direction of their research and the training of their most promising students. The chamber had been thoroughly excavated, with every piece of furniture, every decorative element, and every fragment of inscription carefully removed by the recent visitors. But they had left behind something that would prove far more valuable than any artifact they had taken. Carved into the chamber's floor in fresh script that still glowed faintly with dark side energy was a message clearly intended for anyone who might follow in the excavator's footsteps. The message was brief but chilling in its implications. The 13 convergence sites have been prepared. The Watchers have been contacted. The Eternal Binding awaits only the final component. When next the stars align as they did at the galaxy's birth, the protocol will be complete. The message was signed, not with a name, but with a symbol that none of the team recognized, but which radiated a sense of ancient authority and malevolent purpose. The symbol appeared to be some kind of hybrid between traditional Sith markings and something far older, something that predated not just the Sith, but perhaps even the earliest civilizations that had learned to harness the power of the Force. As the team prepared to leave Car Delba behind and continue their investigation at other sites, they carried with them the growing realization that they were not investigating isolated incidents of cult activity, but rather the final stages of a plan that had been developing across multiple generations and possibly multiple civilizations. The Convergence Protocol was not some theoretical exercise in dark side philosophy, but an active, ongoing operation that was apparently nearing completion. The implications of what they had discovered on Car Delba extended far beyond the immediate concerns of cult monitoring and historical preservation. If the inscriptions and ritual evidence were accurate, then somewhere in the galaxy, 13 sites were being prepared for a coordinated dark side ceremony of unprecedented scope and power. And if the references to watchers between stars were to be taken literally, then the ceremony might be intended to open communication or even provide access for entities that existed outside the galaxy entirely. The journey ahead would take them to worlds both known and unknown, to archaeological sites that appeared on no official charts, and to encounters with individuals whose knowledge of ancient secrets came at prices that few beings would be willing to pay. Each site they investigated would provide another piece of the puzzle, another fragment of understanding about the true scope and purpose of the Convergence Protocol. But even as they prepared to continue their investigation, none of them could shake the feeling that they were not merely observers of these events, but had somehow been drawn into them as active participants. The message carved into the council chamber floor had been left for someone to find, and the fact that it had been written in basic rather than ancient Sith suggested that its authors had known exactly who would be investigating their activities. The dark side had never been content to merely corrupt individuals or even civilizations. It had always sought to fundamentally alter the balance of the universe itself, to tip the scales of existence toward entropy and chaos. And now, after millennia of patient planning and careful preparation, it appeared that goal might finally be within reach. 3 days after departing Car Delba, the silent archive emerged from hyperspace above Drummond Kai's, the ancient Sith homeworld where shadows had learned to walk and darkness had taken root so deeply that even the planet's storms carried whispers of malevolent intelligence. The world below was shrouded in perpetual twilight, its purple and crimson clouds illuminated from within by lightning that followed patterns too complex and purposeful to be merely natural phenomena. Commander Voss had been to Drummond Kai's twice before in his career as an archaeological investigator, but each visit revealed new layers of corruption that had been building in the planet's ecosystem for over a millennium. The dark side had not merely influenced the world's inhabitants, but had fundamentally altered the basic properties of matter and energy on the planet's surface, creating an environment where the normal laws of physics operated according to different principles than those that governed the rest of the galaxy. The team's destination was a sprawling complex of temples and residential structures that had been built into the planet's ancient jungle canopy, a settlement that existed in the spaces between the massive tree trunks that supported Drummond Kai's primary forest ecosystem. Intelligence reports suggested that this hidden community was home to several hundred individuals who called themselves the Cult of the Eternal Shadow, descendants of followers who had served under Darth Krayt during his brief but devastating reign as Dark Lord of the Sith. The cult had remained hidden in the jungles of Drummond Kai for over a century, sustained by their belief that Darth Krayt's consciousness had not been destroyed when his physical form was killed, but had instead been dispersed into the dark side itself, where it continued to guide and protect his most faithful followers. According to intercepted communications, the cult believed that Krayt's return was imminent and that they had been chosen to serve as the instruments of his resurrection. The approach to the cult settlement required careful navigation through the jungle's lower levels, where the darkness was so complete that even advanced night vision equipment struggled to provide clear images of the surrounding terrain. The trees themselves seemed to shift position when observed directly, and the team's instruments detected energy patterns that suggested the forest was not merely home to dark side practitioners, but had been fundamentally transformed by decades of ritual activity into something that existed as much in the realm of the Force as in normal space. Dr. Corvain's expertise in Sith architecture proved invaluable as they made their way through the settlement's outer defenses, which consisted not of walls or barriers, but of psychological traps designed to turn intruders back before they could reach the cult's inner sanctum. The defenses were subtle but effective, creating feelings of unease and disorientation that would cause most visitors to lose their way in the jungle's maze-like pathways and eventually give up their attempts to reach the settlement. The first structures they encountered were residential buildings that had been constructed using a combination of traditional architectural techniques and dark side-enhanced materials. The walls were made from a black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and the building's interiors were lit by crystals that glowed with the same malevolent red energy that characterized lightsaber crystals that had been corrupted by the dark side of the Force. The settlement's inhabitants moved through their daily routines with the purposeful calm of individuals who had found meaning and direction in their devotion to powers beyond mortal comprehension. They wore simple robes of dark fabric that seemed to shift and flow even when there was no wind, and their faces bore the serene expressions of people who had surrendered their individual will to something greater than themselves. But it was not the cult members' appearance that proved most unsettling to the investigating team. It was their behavior toward the newcomers, which demonstrated a level of awareness and preparation that suggested they had been expecting visitors. The cultists did not react with surprise or suspicion to the arrival of strangers in their hidden settlement, but instead welcomed them with the quiet courtesy of hosts who had been anticipating guests. The cult's leader, a woman who appeared to be in her 70s, but whose eyes held the depth of someone who had lived far longer than any normal human lifespan would allow, introduced herself simply as Shadowkeeper Vex. She had been born into the cult during the chaotic years following Darth Krayt's death, and had spent her entire life studying the techniques that her people believed would eventually allow their master to return to physical form. Shadowkeeper Vex's knowledge of ancient Sith lore was both impressive and deeply disturbing. She spoke of Darth Krayt not as a historical figure who had lived and died according to the normal cycles of mortal existence, but as an eternal presence that had transcended the limitations of physical form to become something far more dangerous and powerful than he had ever been while alive. According to her teachings, Krayt's consciousness had been scattered across the dark side itself, embedded in the Force in ways that made him effectively immortal as long as there were followers to serve as vessels for his will. The cult's central temple was a masterpiece of dark side architecture that combined elements from multiple Sith traditions into something that was both beautiful and terrifying to behold. The structure seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, with chambers that were larger inside than the space they occupied should have allowed, and corridors that led to destinations that changed depending on the spiritual state of the person walking through them. Within the temple's main sanctuary, the team discovered evidence of ritual practices that went far beyond anything that had been documented in previous studies of Sith cults. The cultists had developed techniques for what they called essence grafting, a process that allowed them to temporarily merge their consciousness with fragments of Darth Krayt's dispersed spirit, gaining access to knowledge and power that would normally be beyond their capabilities. The essence grafting rituals were performed using artifacts that the cult claimed were fragments of Darth Krayt's original lightsaber, pieces of armor that he had worn during his most significant battles, and most importantly, crystals that had been exposed to his presence for extended periods during his lifetime. These artifacts served as focal points that allowed the cultists to establish temporary connections with their master's consciousness, receiving guidance and instruction directly from the source of their devotion. But the most significant discovery in the temple was not any single artifact or ritual space, but rather a comprehensive archive of communications between the cult of the Eternal Shadow and other dark side organizations throughout the galaxy. The archive revealed that the cult was not an isolated group of fanatics, but rather part of a vast network of interconnected organizations that shared information, resources, and coordinated their activities according to a plan that extended far beyond any single group's individual goals. The communications archive contained references to the convergence protocol that the team had first encountered on Car Delba, but from the perspective of participants rather than outside observers. The cult of the Eternal Shadow had been assigned specific responsibilities within the larger plan, tasks that involved maintaining certain ritual sites on Droman Kaz and preparing for ceremonies that would be coordinated with activities on 12 other worlds throughout the galaxy. According to the archived communications, each of the 13 participating organizations had been entrusted with maintaining one piece of what was called the Eternal Binding, a complex ritual structure that required precise coordination between multiple groups performing simultaneous ceremonies at locations that had been chosen for their specific dark side properties. The cult's role in this structure involved maintaining the Shadow Anchor, a permanent dark side nexus that would serve as one of the focal points for the larger ceremony. The Shadow Anchor itself was located in the deepest levels of the cult's temple complex, in chambers that had been carved directly into Droman Kaz's bedrock and enhanced with Sith alchemy to create a space where the boundaries between the physical world and the realm of the Force became virtually non-existent. The anchor took the form of a crystalline structure that pulsed with dark energy and seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time, creating localized distortions in reality that made direct observation both difficult and dangerous. Shadowkeeper Vex's willingness to share information about the cult's activities and beliefs initially seemed like a stroke of remarkable good fortune for the investigating team. But as the conversations continued, it became clear that her openness was not the result of cooperation, but rather of supreme confidence. She was not concerned about revealing the cult's secrets because she believed that the convergence protocol was so close to completion that no outside force could prevent its success. According to Shadowkeeper Vex, the preparations for the convergence protocol had been underway for over 2 centuries, guided by prophetic visions that had been received by dark side practitioners throughout the galaxy. These visions had provided detailed instructions for the construction of ritual sites, the gathering of specific artifacts, and the timing of ceremonies that would culminate in what she called the return of the First Darkness. The First Darkness, as described in the cult's sacred texts, was not merely the return of Darth Krayt or any other individual Sith Lord, but rather the awakening of a primordial force that had existed before the galaxy itself had formed. A cosmic entity that had been sleeping in the spaces between stars and waiting for the proper conditions to return to active influence over the material universe. The Convergence Protocol was designed to create those conditions by establishing a network of dark side nexus points that would serve as anchors for the First Darkness return. The implications of this revelation extended far beyond the scope of cult monitoring or archaeological investigation. If the cult of the Eternal Shadow's beliefs were accurate, then the galaxy was facing a threat that made the Empire, the Yuuzhan Vong invasion, and even the Final Order pale in comparison. The return of the First Darkness would not merely result in the establishment of another dark side government or the conquest of specific worlds, but would fundamentally alter the nature of reality itself throughout the known universe. As the team prepared to leave Droman Kaz and continue their investigation at other sites, They carried with them detailed records of the cult's activities and communications, evidence that would prove crucial in understanding the full scope of the conspiracy they were uncovering. But they also carried with them the disturbing knowledge that they were not merely investigating historical curiosities or isolated incidents of cult activity, but were instead documenting the final stages of a plan that had been developing for centuries and was apparently approaching its moment of ultimate completion. The journey ahead would take them to the remaining sites mentioned in the cult's communications archive, each one representing another piece of the eternal binding and another step closer to understanding the true nature of the threat that the galaxy was facing. But even as they prepared for the challenges ahead, none of them could escape the feeling that their investigation was itself part of a larger plan, that their discovery of these sites and their documentation of these activities was not accidental but had been anticipated and perhaps even desired by the forces they were attempting to understand. The dark side had always been patient, always willing to work across multiple generations and civilizations to achieve its ultimate goals. And now, after centuries of careful preparation and meticulous planning, those goals appeared to be within reach. The only question remaining was whether the forces of light would be able to recognize the threat and respond to it before the convergence protocol reached its final irreversible stage. The silent archive drifted through the hyperspace lanes between Drummond Cars and their next destination. Its cargo holds now filled with data crystals containing thousands of hours of recorded communications between dark side cults throughout the galaxy. Commander Voss stood in the ship's central briefing chamber, surrounded by holographic displays that showed the emerging pattern of cult activities across dozens of star systems, and for the first time since beginning this investigation, he felt a sense of cautious optimism about their ability to understand and perhaps even prevent whatever the cults were planning. The evidence they had gathered from Car Delba and Drummond Cars painted a clear picture of coordinated activity between multiple dark-side organizations, but the coordination appeared to follow predictable patterns that could be analyzed and countered using conventional intelligence techniques. The cults were using standard encryption methods for their communications, their ritual sites followed known Sith architectural principles, and their recruitment and training methods were variations on techniques that had been documented extensively during the Imperial period. Dr. Corvain had spent the past 18 hours analyzing the communications archive from the cult of the Eternal Shadow, and her preliminary findings suggested that the entire network of dark side organizations could be understood as an evolution of the cult structures that had supported various Sith Lords throughout galactic history. The Convergence Protocol, despite its ominous name and apocalyptic rhetoric, appeared to be a relatively straightforward attempt to coordinate multiple cult groups in a series of simultaneous rituals designed to create a galaxy-wide dark side nexus. The concept was certainly ambitious and potentially dangerous, but it was not unprecedented in Sith history. Similar attempts at coordinated dark side rituals had been documented during the reigns of Darth Revan, Darth Malak, and most recently during Emperor Palpatine's efforts to maintain control over the galaxy through force-based manipulation. In each case, the rituals had ultimately failed because they required a level of precision and coordination that was beyond the capabilities of the participating organizations. Dex Krennic's analysis of the tactical aspects of the cult network supported Dr. Corvain's academic conclusions. The organizational structure of the various groups followed standard Imperial intelligence cell-based models, with compartmentalized information sharing and hierarchical command structures that were designed to prevent any single compromise from bringing down the entire network. The cult's security protocols, while sophisticated, were variations on techniques that had been developed and refined during the Empire's counterinsurgency operations against rebel cells. The recruitment methods used by the cults were also familiar to anyone who had studied Imperial Inquisitor operations. The cults targeted individuals who were force-sensitive but had received no formal training, offering them power and purpose in exchange for absolute loyalty. The psychological conditioning techniques were harsh but effective, creating devoted followers who genuinely believed that their activities were serving a greater cosmic purpose rather than merely advancing the political goals of their leaders. Based on their analysis of the available evidence, the team developed a working theory that explained both the scope and the ultimate limitations of the conspiracy they were investigating. The various dark side cults throughout the galaxy were indeed coordinating their activities according to a master plan that had been developing for decades, but the plan itself was fundamentally flawed because it relied on the same centralized command structure that had repeatedly failed throughout Sith history. The Convergence Protocol appeared to be the creation of a single individual or small group of individuals who possessed extensive knowledge of Sith history and dark side ritual techniques, but who had made the same fundamental error that had doomed previous attempts at galaxy-wide dark side domination. They had assumed that they could maintain effective control over multiple independent organizations across vast distances and coordinate their activities with the precision required for success. The evidence suggested that the mysterious leaders behind the Convergence Protocol had learned from the tactical mistakes of previous Sith Lords and had developed more sophisticated methods for maintaining communication and coordination between their various cult cells. But they had not solved the fundamental problem that had always limited the effectiveness of dark side organizations, which was the tendency of dark side practitioners to pursue their own individual power at the expense of group cohesion. The communications archive from Drummond Caris contained numerous examples of disputes between different cult groups, competition for resources and territory, and disagreements about the interpretation of orders received from higher levels in the organization. Several of the participating cults had apparently abandoned the network entirely after conflicts with other groups, and at least 3 organizations had been destroyed by internal power struggles that had turned into open warfare between different factions. The pattern of organizational dysfunction that emerged from the communications data was so consistent with historical examples of Sith political structures that Dr. Corvain was able to use established models of dark side group dynamics to predict which of the remaining cult organizations were most likely to remain stable and effective and which were approaching the point of internal collapse. Commander Voss found himself feeling almost disappointed by the mundane nature of the threat they were investigating. The apocalyptic rhetoric about the return of the First Darkness and the eternal binding had initially suggested that they were dealing with something unprecedented in galactic history, but the evidence indicated that they were simply observing another iteration of the same power struggles that had characterized Sith politics for millennia. The investigation team's growing confidence in their understanding of the cult network was reinforced by their success in predicting the locations of several previously unknown cult sites based on the patterns they had identified in the communications data. Their analysis had suggested that the cults would need to establish ritual sites in locations with specific dark side energy signatures, and systematic surveys of worlds with the appropriate characteristics had revealed 3 additional cult compounds that matched their theoretical predictions perfectly. The success of their predictive model suggested that they had correctly identified the underlying logic that governed the cult network's activities, and this understanding could be used to develop effective countermeasures against the Convergence Protocol. The New Republic's military forces could be deployed to disrupt the most critical ritual sites, intelligence operations could be initiated to infiltrate and compromise the cult organizations, and diplomatic pressure could be applied to planetary governments to prevent the cults from establishing new bases of operation. For the first time since beginning their investigation, the team felt that they had a clear path forward for preventing whatever catastrophe the dark side cults were attempting to orchestrate. The conspiracy was vast and well organized, but it followed understandable principles and could be countered using conventional methods. The galaxy had faced similar threats before and had survived, and there was no reason to believe that this iteration would be any more successful than its predecessors. But even as Commander Voss prepared his preliminary report for transmission to New Republic intelligence, recommending immediate action to disrupt the cult network before the convergence protocol could be completed, he found himself troubled by small inconsistencies in the evidence that did not quite fit their theoretical model. The communications archive contained references to resources and capabilities that seemed beyond what any known dark side organization could realistically possess, and several of the ritual sites they had investigated showed signs of knowledge and techniques that were not documented in any existing Sith texts. Dr. Carvin had also noted anomalies in the archaeological evidence from both Car Delba and Drummond Kai. The excavation techniques used at both sites demonstrated a level of precision and efficiency that suggested access to advanced technology and expert knowledge, but the specific methods used were not consistent with any known Imperial or New Republic archaeological protocols. The excavators had possessed detailed maps of the underground structures they were targeting, maps that were more accurate than anything in the official archaeological databases. DEX's tactical analysis had identified similar inconsistencies in the cult organization's operational security protocols. While most of their techniques were variations on known Imperial intelligence methods, several of their communication encryption systems used mathematical principles that had not been developed until after the fall of the Empire. The cult somehow had access to cutting-edge cryptographic technology that should have been available only to the most advanced military and intelligence organizations in the galaxy. These anomalies were troubling, but they did not fundamentally challenge the team's understanding of the conspiracy they were investigating. Advanced technology and sophisticated techniques could be explained by assuming that the cult leadership included individuals with high-level Imperial or New Republic backgrounds who had retained access to classified resources and information. The inconsistencies were noteworthy, but not necessarily indicative of anything more dangerous than a well-funded and expertly managed criminal conspiracy. The team's confidence in their analysis was further reinforced when they successfully predicted and prevented a planned cult ritual on the outer rim world of Celeste. Acting on intelligence derived from their communication intercepts, New Republic security forces were able to arrest 17 cult members who had been preparing to perform what they claimed was a critical component of the Eternal Binding ceremony. The arrested cultists possessed detailed ritual instructions and specialized equipment that matched the team's theoretical predictions about the requirements for convergence protocol ceremonies. The success on Sullust seemed to confirm that the cult network could be effectively countered using conventional law enforcement and military methods. The conspiracy was dangerous and well organized, but it was not beyond the capabilities of the New Republic security apparatus to contain and eventually eliminate. The investigation had revealed the scope and nature of the threat, and appropriate countermeasures could now be implemented to protect the galaxy from whatever the dark side cults had been planning. But as the Silent Archive prepared to jump to hyperspace for their next destination, carrying with it the team's preliminary conclusions and recommendations for immediate action against the cult network, none of them noticed the subtle energy fluctuations in the ship's communication systems that indicated their transmissions were being monitored by sources that possessed technology far more advanced than anything the cults should have been able to access. The feeling of having solved a complex puzzle and identified a manageable threat was comforting. But it was also exactly what someone with a deeper understanding of the conspiracy would want them to feel. The evidence they had gathered and the conclusions they had drawn were not wrong, but they were incomplete in ways that would only become apparent when they encountered the true scope and nature of the forces that were manipulating events from behind the carefully constructed facade of predictable cult activity. The dark side had always been patient, and its most successful practitioners had always understood that the greatest victories were achieved not through direct confrontation, but through allowing enemies to defeat themselves by acting on incomplete information. The investigation team's growing confidence in their ability to understand and counter the conspiracy was not a sign of their success, but rather evidence that they were proceeding exactly according to someone else's plan. The silent archive drifted through the hyperspace lanes between Drummond Cass and their next destination, its cargo holds now filled with data crystals containing thousands of hours of recorded communications between dark side cults throughout the galaxy. Commander Voss stood in the ship's central briefing chamber, surrounded by holographic displays that showed the emerging pattern of cult activities across dozens of star systems. And for the first time since beginning this investigation, he felt a sense of cautious optimism about their ability to understand and perhaps even prevent whatever the cults were planning. The evidence they had gathered from Car Delba and Drummond Cass painted a clear picture of coordinated activity between multiple dark side organizations, but the coordination appeared to follow predictable patterns that could be analyzed and countered using conventional intelligence techniques. The cults were using standard encryption methods for their communications, their ritual sites followed known Sith architectural principles, and their recruitment and training methods were variations on techniques that had been documented extensively during the Imperial period. Dr. Curvain had spent the past 18 hours analyzing the communications archive from the Cult of the Eternal Shadow, and her preliminary findings suggested that the entire network of dark side organizations could be understood as an evolution of the cult structures that had supported various Sith Lords throughout galactic history. The Convergence Protocol, despite its ominous name and apocalyptic rhetoric, appeared to be a relatively straightforward attempt to coordinate multiple cult groups in a series of simultaneous rituals designed to create a galaxy-wide dark side nexus. The concept was certainly ambitious and potentially dangerous, but it was not unprecedented in Sith history. Similar attempts at coordinated dark side rituals had been documented during the reigns of Darth Revan, Darth Malak, and most recently during Emperor Palpatine's efforts to maintain control over the galaxy through Force-based manipulation. In each case, the rituals had ultimately failed because they required a level of precision and coordination that was beyond the capabilities of the participating organizations. Dex Krennic's analysis of the tactical aspects of the cult network supported Dr. Corvain's academic conclusions. The organizational structure of the various groups followed standard Imperial intelligence cell-based models, with compartmentalized information sharing and hierarchical command structures that were designed to prevent any single compromise from bringing down the entire network. The cult's security protocols, while sophisticated, were variations on techniques that had been developed and refined during the Empire's counterinsurgency operations against rebel cells. The recruitment methods used by the cults were also familiar to anyone who had studied Imperial Inquisitor operations. The cults targeted individuals who were force-sensitive but had received no formal training, offering them power and purpose in exchange for absolute loyalty. The psychological conditioning techniques were harsh but effective, creating devoted followers who genuinely believed that their activities were serving a greater cosmic purpose, rather than merely advancing the political goals of their leaders. Based on their analysis of the available evidence, the team developed a working theory that explained both the scope and the ultimate limitations of the conspiracy they were investigating. The various dark side cults throughout the galaxy were indeed coordinating their activities according to a master plan that had been developing for decades, but the plan itself was fundamentally flawed because it relied on the same centralized command structure that had repeatedly failed throughout Sith history. The Convergence Protocol appeared to be the creation of a single individual or small group of individuals who possessed extensive knowledge of Sith history and dark side ritual techniques, but who had made the same fundamental error that had doomed previous attempts at galaxy-wide dark side domination. They had assumed that they could maintain effective control over multiple independent organizations across vast distances and coordinate their activities with the precision required for success. The evidence suggested that the mysterious leaders behind the Convergence Protocol had learned from the tactical mistakes of previous Sith Lords and had developed more sophisticated methods for maintaining communication and coordination between their various cult cells. But they had not solved a fundamental problem that had always limited the effectiveness of dark side organizations, which was the tendency of dark side practitioners to pursue their own individual power at the expense of group cohesion. The communications archive from Drummond Cass contained numerous examples of disputes between different cult groups, competition for resources and territory, and disagreements about the interpretation of orders received from higher levels in the organization. Several of the participating cults had apparently abandoned the network entirely after conflicts with other groups, and at least 3 organizations had been destroyed by internal power struggles that had turned into open warfare between different factions. The pattern of organizational dysfunction that emerged from the communications data was so consistent with historical examples of Sith political structures that Dr. Corvain was able to use established models of dark side group dynamics to predict which of the remaining cult organizations were most likely to remain stable and effective, and which were approaching the point of internal collapse. Commander Voss found himself feeling almost disappointed by the mundane nature of the threat they were investigating. The apocalyptic rhetoric about the return of the First Darkness and the eternal binding had initially suggested that they were dealing with something unprecedented in galactic history, but the evidence indicated that they were simply observing another iteration of the same power struggles that had characterized Sith politics for millennia. The investigation team's growing confidence in their understanding of the cult network was reinforced by their success in predicting the locations of several previously unknown cult sites based on the patterns they had identified in the communications data. Their analysis had suggested that the cults would need to establish ritual sites in locations with specific dark side energy signatures, and systematic surveys of worlds with the appropriate characteristics had revealed 3 additional cult compounds that matched their theoretical predictions perfectly. The success of their predictive model suggested that they had correctly identified the underlying logic that governed the cult network's activities, and this understanding could be used to develop effective countermeasures against the Convergence Protocol. The New Republic's military forces could be deployed to disrupt the most critical ritual sites, intelligence operations could be initiated to infiltrate and compromise the cult organizations, and diplomatic pressure could be applied to planetary governments to prevent the cults from establishing new bases of operation. For the first time since beginning their investigation, the team felt that they had a clear path forward for preventing whatever catastrophe the dark side cults were attempting to orchestrate. The conspiracy was vast and well organized, but it followed understandable principles and could be countered using conventional methods. The galaxy had faced similar threats before and had survived, and there was no reason to believe that this iteration would be any more successful than its predecessors. But even as Commander Voss prepared his preliminary report for transmission to New Republic intelligence, recommending immediate action to disrupt the cult network before the Convergence Protocol could be completed, he found himself troubled by small inconsistencies in the evidence that did not quite fit their theoretical model. The communications archive contained references to resources and capabilities that seemed beyond what any known dark side organization could realistically possess, and several of the ritual sites they had investigated showed signs of knowledge and techniques that were not documented in any existing Sith texts. Dr. Corvain had also noted anomalies in the archaeological evidence from both Car Delba and Drummond Cass. The excavation techniques used at both sites demonstrated a level of precision and efficiency that suggested access to advanced technology and expert knowledge, but the specific methods used were not consistent with any known Imperial or New Republic archaeological protocols. The excavators had possessed detailed maps of the underground structures they were targeting, maps that were more accurate than anything in the official archaeological databases. DEXI's tactical analysis had identified similar inconsistencies in the cult organization's operational security protocols. While most of their techniques were variations on known Imperial intelligence methods, several of their communication encryption systems used mathematical principles that had not been developed until after the fall of the Empire. The cult somehow had access to cutting-edge cryptographic technology that should have been available only to the most advanced military and intelligence organizations in the galaxy. These anomalies were troubling, but they did not fundamentally challenge the team's understanding of the conspiracy they were investigating. Advanced technology and sophisticated techniques could be explained by assuming that the cult leadership included individuals with high-level Imperial or New Republic backgrounds who had retained access to classified resources and information. The inconsistencies were noteworthy, but not necessarily indicative of anything more dangerous than a well-funded and expertly managed criminal conspiracy. The team's confidence in their analysis was further reinforced when they successfully predicted and prevented a planned cult ritual on the outer rim world of Solast. Acting on intelligence derived from their communication intercepts, New Republic security forces were able to arrest 17 cult members who had been preparing to perform what they claimed was a critical component of the Eternal Binding ceremony. The arrested cultists possessed detailed ritual instructions and specialized equipment that matched the team's theoretical predictions about the requirements for convergence protocol ceremonies. The success on Solast seemed to confirm that the cult network could be effectively countered using conventional law enforcement and military methods. The conspiracy was dangerous and well organized, but it was not beyond the capabilities of the New Republic's security apparatus to contain and eventually eliminate. The investigation had revealed the scope and nature of the threat, and appropriate countermeasures could now be implemented to protect the galaxy from whatever the dark side cults had been planning. But as the Silent Archive prepared to jump to hyperspace for their next destination, carrying with it the team's preliminary conclusions and recommendations for immediate action against the cult network, none of them noticed the subtle energy fluctuations in the ship's communication systems that indicated their transmissions were being monitored by sources that possessed technology far more advanced than anything the cults should have been able to access. The feeling of having solved a complex puzzle and identified a manageable threat was comforting, but it was also exactly what someone with a deeper understanding of the conspiracy would want them to feel. The evidence they had gathered and the conclusions they had drawn were not wrong, but they were incomplete in ways that would only become apparent when they encountered the true scope and nature of the forces that were manipulating events from behind the carefully constructed facade of predictable cult activity. The dark side had always been patient, and its most successful practitioners had always understood that the greatest victories were achieved not through direct confrontation, but through allowing enemies to defeat themselves by acting on incomplete information. The investigation team's growing confidence in their ability to understand and counter the conspiracy was not a sign of their success, but rather evidence that they were proceeding exactly according to someone else's plan. The journey to the outer rim world of Dathomir carried the Silent Archive through hyperspace routes that had been abandoned by commercial traffic for over a decade, stellar pathways that led through sectors where entire star systems had gone silent during the chaotic years following the Empire's collapse. The ship's navigation computers required constant recalibration to account for gravitational anomalies that had not existed in the original survey data, distortions in space-time that suggested the presence of massive objects or energy fields that did not appear on any sensor readings. Dathomir itself appeared unchanged from orbit, its crimson surface marked by the same mountain ranges and desert expanses that had characterized the planet for millennia. But the planet's force signature had been fundamentally altered since the last official survey, radiating patterns of dark side energy that were both more intense and more chaotic than anything that had been documented during the world's previous periods of Sith occupation. The investigation team's destination was a facility that had been constructed in the planet's northern polar region, far from the traditional territories of the Night Sister clans and the ancient Sith strongholds that dotted Dathomir's more hospitable equatorial zones. Intelligence reports suggested that the facility had been built using Imperial construction techniques but had been modified extensively by its current occupants, who called themselves the Blackwing Brotherhood and claimed descent from the Death Troopers who had served Emperor Palpatine during the final years of his reign. The approach to the Brotherhood's compound required navigation through a region of Dathomir's atmosphere that had been contaminated by what appeared to be biological agents of unknown origin. The Silent Archive's environmental systems detected airborne pathogens that shared characteristics with several known Imperial bioweapons but had been modified in ways that suggested extensive experimentation and refinement by individuals with advanced knowledge of both biological warfare and dark-side alchemy. The compound itself was a sprawling complex of interconnected structures that combined Imperial military architecture with organic elements that seemed to grow and change according to their own internal logic. The buildings were constructed from materials that appeared to be partially alive, walls that pulsed with their own circulatory systems and floors that responded to the presence of visitors by shifting texture and temperature in ways that suggested some form of primitive consciousness. Dr. Corvain's analysis of the compound's construction revealed techniques that had been pioneered during the Empire's most classified bioweapons research programs, projects that had attempted to merge traditional Imperial technology with Sith alchemical principles to create weapons and soldiers that would be immune to conventional countermeasures. The Brotherhood had apparently continued and expanded upon this research, developing applications that went far beyond anything that had been attempted during the Imperial period. The Brotherhood's members presented a disturbing mixture of human and non-human characteristics that reflected decades of voluntary exposure to mutagenic agents and dark-side energies. They retained their basic humanoid forms, but their skin had taken on a grayish pallor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and their eyes glowed with the same malevolent red energy that characterized corrupted kyber crystals. The Brotherhood's leader, who identified himself only as Vector Prime, had been a Death Trooper commander during the Battle of Scarif, and had survived the destruction of the first Death Star through what he claimed was direct intervention by the dark side of the Force. His subsequent transformation had been both physical and spiritual, turning him into something that existed at the boundary between life and death, possessing the memories and personality of his former self, while operating according to principles that transcended normal biological limitations. Vector Prime's knowledge of Imperial bioweapons research was comprehensive and deeply disturbing. He spoke of programs that had attempted to create soldiers who could not be killed by conventional means, warriors who would continue fighting even after sustaining injuries that would be fatal to normal beings. The Death Troopers had been only the beginning of this research, a preliminary step toward the development of armies that would be literally unstoppable by any force that opposed the Empire. The Brotherhood's role in the Convergence Protocol involved maintaining what they called the Mortality Anchor, a nexus point that would serve to regulate the boundary between life and death throughout the galaxy during the ceremony's climactic phase. According to Vector Prime's explanation, the protocol required precise control over the fundamental forces that govern biological existence, and the mortality anchor would ensure that the cosmic transformation proceeded according to plan rather than spiraling into uncontrolled chaos. The mortality anchor itself was located in the deepest levels of the Brotherhood's compound, in chambers that had been carved into Dathomir's bedrock and infused with concentrated essence extracted from beings who had died in proximity to powerful dark side nexus points. The resulting environment was one where the normal distinction between living and dead became meaningless, where consciousness could persist and function independently of biological support systems. The chambers surrounding the mortality anchor contained evidence of experiments that pushed the boundaries of biological science and dark side alchemy to their absolute limits. The Brotherhood had developed techniques for preserving consciousness in beings who had been clinically dead for extended periods, creating what they called death-touched individuals who retained their memories and personalities while gaining abilities that were impossible for normal living beings. Vector Prime's demonstration of these abilities was both impressive and horrifying to witness. He could survive injuries that would kill any normal being, function without need for food or sleep, and most disturbing of all, communicate directly with the consciousness of beings who had died in proximity to dark side nexus points. The Brotherhood had effectively created a network of communication with the dead, gaining access to knowledge and perspectives that spanned centuries of galactic history. The Brotherhood's archives contain detailed records of communications with deceased Sith Lords, Imperial officers, and even some Jedi who had fallen to the dark side during their final moments. These communications had provided the Brotherhood with historical information that was not available through any conventional sources, including detailed accounts of ancient rituals and ceremonies that had been deliberately erased from official records. The most significant revelation from these communications was the discovery that the Convergence Protocol was not a recent development, but had been planned and prepared for over a millennium by successive generations of dark side practitioners who had maintained their involvement in the project, even after their physical deaths. The protocol represented the culmination of work that had been carried out by individuals who possessed a perspective on galactic history that extended far beyond normal mortal lifespans. The dead Sith Lords who communicated through the Brotherhood's network had provided detailed instructions for the construction and operation of the various anchor points required for the Convergence Protocol, drawing on knowledge that had been accumulated across multiple civilizations and eras. The ceremony's design incorporated elements from the ancient Rakata Infinite Empire, the pre-Republic Sith civilizations, and even older cultures that had existed before the galaxy's current dominant species had developed space travel. Vector Prime's revelations about the true scope and antiquity of the Convergence Protocol fundamentally altered the investigation team's understanding of what they were dealing with. The conspiracy was not merely a contemporary threat orchestrated by modern dark side cults, but was instead the latest phase of a plan that had been developing for over 1,000 years and involved the coordinated efforts of beings who had transcended the normal limitations of mortal existence. The implications of this discovery extended far beyond the immediate concerns of preventing a specific dark side ritual. If the Brotherhood's communications with deceased Sith Lords were accurate, then the galaxy was facing a threat that had been building across multiple generations and civilizations, guided by intelligences that possessed knowledge and resources that were fundamentally beyond anything that contemporary galactic civilization could hope to match or counter. The Brotherhood's experiments with the boundary between life and death had also revealed disturbing information about the nature of consciousness itself and its relationship to the Force. According to Vector Prime's research, consciousness was not dependent on biological support systems in the way that conventional science assumed, but was instead a fundamental property of the Force that could persist and function independently of physical embodiment under the right conditions. This understanding had led the Brotherhood to develop techniques for what they called consciousness transfer, the ability to move an individual's complete mental patterns from one biological host to another, or even to maintain consciousness in artificial substrates that could support mental activity without requiring traditional life support systems. The implications of such technology were staggering, suggesting the possibility of effective immortality for those who possessed the knowledge and resources to implement it. But the most terrifying aspect of the Brotherhood's research was their discovery that consciousness transfer was not merely a theoretical possibility, but had been implemented on a massive scale by the architects of the Convergence Protocol. The various cult leaders and dark side practitioners who were coordinating the ceremony were not independent individuals pursuing their own agendas, but were instead manifestations of a much smaller number of ancient consciousnesses that had been distributed across multiple bodies and organizations. The investigation team's growing understanding of the true nature of their adversaries made it increasingly clear that they were not dealing with a conventional conspiracy that could be disrupted through traditional intelligence and military operations. The forces behind the Convergence Protocol possessed capabilities that transcended the normal limitations of space, time, and biological existence, and their plan had been developing and adapting for far longer than any conventional organization could hope to maintain operational continuity. Vector Prime's final revelation was perhaps the most disturbing of all. The Brotherhood's communications with deceased Sith Lords had revealed that the investigation team's activities were not merely being monitored, but had been anticipated and incorporated into the overall design of the Convergence Protocol. Their discovery of the various cult organizations and anchor points was not evidence of successful intelligence work, but was instead evidence that they were proceeding exactly according to a plan that had been developed by intelligences that operated on timescales measured in centuries rather than years. The team's investigation had not been uncovering a hidden conspiracy, but had instead been following a carefully prepared trail of evidence that was designed to lead them to specific conclusions and actions that would ultimately serve the interests of the protocol's architects. Their sense of making progress and gaining understanding was not the result of their own investigative skills, but was instead evidence that they were being manipulated by forces that understood their psychology and motivations better than they understood themselves. As the Silent Archive prepared to depart Dathomir and continue their investigation at other sites, the team carried with them the disturbing knowledge that their entire mission might be serving the very forces they were attempting to oppose. The conspiracy they were investigating had moved beyond the realm of conventional threats and had entered territory where the normal concepts of opposition and resistance became meaningless. The journey ahead would take them deeper into the shadows of a plan that spanned multiple lifetimes and civilizations, to encounters with beings who had transcended the normal limitations of mortality and time. Each new discovery would reveal another layer of a conspiracy so vast and ancient that its true scope might be beyond the ability of any mortal intelligence to fully comprehend. The hyperspace journey to the unknown regions required navigation through stellar phenomena that defied conventional astrophysics, regions of space where the normal laws of physics seemed to operate according to different principles than those that governed the rest of the galaxy. The Silent Archive's instruments detected gravitational anomalies that suggested the presence of massive objects that cast no shadows, generated no heat, and reflected no electromagnetic radiation, as if entire star systems existed in dimensions that were only partially connected to normal space-time. The destination coordinates led to a star system that appeared on no official charts, a collection of worlds orbiting a dying star, whose light had taken on spectral characteristics that were not found in any known stellar classification system. The primary world of this system was a planet that had been transformed by forces that were clearly not natural, its surface scarred by geometric patterns that were visible even from orbit and which seemed to pulse with their own internal rhythm. This was the hidden stronghold of the Prophets of the Dark Tide, a cult organization that claimed to have received visions and guidance from intelligences that existed beyond the boundaries of the galaxy itself. Unlike the other dark side groups that the investigation team had encountered, the Prophets drew their power and knowledge not from traditional Sith teachings or ancient Jedi philosophy, but from contact with entities that they believed had been observing and influencing galactic civilization since before the first sentient species had developed space travel. The planet's surface showed clear evidence of extensive terraforming that had been carried out using techniques that were not found in any known engineering database. Vast areas of the world's crust had been reshaped into patterns that seemed to serve no practical purpose, but which generated complex energy fields that extended far beyond the planet's atmosphere and into the surrounding space. The patterns were clearly artificial, but had been created using principles that were fundamentally different from any technology that had been developed by the galaxy's known civilizations. Commander Voss guided the silent archive through the planet's defensive perimeter, following approach vectors that had been transmitted to them through encrypted channels by sources that had somehow anticipated their arrival. The planet's orbital space was filled with structures that combined organic and mechanical elements in ways that suggested a completely different approach to engineering and construction than anything that had been developed within the galaxy. The Prophet's primary settlement was built into the planet's largest geometric formation, a spiral pattern that descended deep into the world's crust, and which seemed to serve as both a residential complex and a massive ritual space designed to amplify and focus energies that were drawn from sources beyond normal space-time. The settlement's inhabitants moved through their daily routines with the purposeful calm of individuals who had dedicated their lives to serving purposes that extended far beyond their own immediate needs and desires. The cult's leader was a being who had once been human but had been so extensively modified by exposure to extragalactic energies that determining his original species was no longer possible. He called himself Prophet Zirak and claimed to have been in direct communication with the entities that he served for over 2 centuries, though his apparent age suggested that such extended contact had come at the cost of normal biological aging processes. Prophet Zirak's knowledge of galactic history was both comprehensive and deeply disturbing, encompassing events and civilizations that predated any known historical records. He spoke of the galaxy's development not as a natural process of stellar formation and biological evolution, but as a carefully orchestrated experiment carried out by intelligences that existed in dimensions beyond normal space-time and which viewed the entire galaxy as a single, integrated system designed to serve purposes that were beyond mortal comprehension. According to the Prophet's revelations, the galaxy had been seeded with life and guided through its development by entities that he called the architects of eternity, beings that existed simultaneously across multiple dimensions and time streams, and which possessed the ability to manipulate the fundamental forces that governed reality itself. The various civilizations that had risen and fallen throughout galactic history had not been independent developments, but had instead been deliberate experiments designed to test different approaches to biological and technological evolution. The Prophet's role in the Convergence Protocol was to maintain what they called the dimensional anchor, a nexus point that would serve to stabilize the barriers between normal space-time and the extra-dimensional realms, where the architects of eternity maintained their primary existence. According to Prophet Zirak's explanation, the protocol required precise control over dimensional boundaries to prevent the cosmic transformation from tearing apart the fabric of reality itself. The dimensional anchor was located in the deepest levels of the settlement's spiral structure, in chambers that had been carved from materials that were not found anywhere else in the galaxy, and which seemed to exist partially outside normal 3-dimensional space. The chambers contained equipment that combined biological and mechanical elements in ways that suggested a completely different approach to technology than anything that had been developed by known galactic civilizations. The most disturbing aspect of the Prophet's facility was the presence of what appeared to be communication devices that were in active contact with intelligences that existed beyond the galaxy's boundaries. The devices generated signals that were transmitted through dimensions that were not accessible to conventional sensors, and the responses that were received carried information and instructions that were clearly originating from sources that possessed knowledge and capabilities far beyond anything that existed within normal space-time. Prophet Zirak's demonstration of the communication system revealed the true scope of the conspiracy that the investigation team had been uncovering. The various cult organizations throughout the galaxy were not independent groups pursuing their own agendas, but were instead local manifestations of a single coordinated effort that was being directed by intelligences that operated on cosmic scales and which viewed the entire galaxy as a single, unified system. The communications that the prophets received from the architects of eternity contained detailed instructions for the implementation of the Convergence Protocol, including precise timing requirements, energy calculations, and coordination protocols that ensured that the various anchor points would function together as components of a single integrated system. The level of detail and sophistication in these instructions was far beyond anything that could have been developed by any civilization that existed within the galaxy's known history. But the most terrifying revelation from the extragalactic communications was the discovery that the Convergence Protocol was not an isolated event, but was instead part of a larger pattern of cosmic transformation that the architects of eternity had been implementing across multiple galaxies and dimensional realms. The galaxy was not unique in being subjected to this process, but was instead one of many systems that were being prepared for integration into a larger cosmic structure that existed across dimensions and time streams that were beyond mortal comprehension. The investigation team's growing understanding of the true scope of the conspiracy they were investigating made it increasingly clear that they were dealing with forces that transcended not only galactic civilization, but the basic principles of space and time that governed normal existence. The threat they were facing was not merely political or military, but was instead cosmic in scope, involving the fundamental transformation of reality itself, according to principles that were designed and implemented by intelligences that existed beyond the normal boundaries of the universe. Prophet Zerak's revelations about the nature of the architects of eternity and their long-term plans for galactic civilization raised questions that were almost too vast to comprehend. If the Prophet's communications were accurate, then every major event in galactic history, from the rise and fall of the Rakata Infinite Empire to the recent conflicts between the Republic and the Sith, had been orchestrated according to a plan that was designed to prepare the galaxy for its eventual integration into a cosmic structure that spanned multiple dimensions and realities. The implications of this understanding extended far beyond the immediate concerns of preventing the Convergence Protocol from reaching completion. If the architects of eternity possessed the capabilities that Prophet Zerak described, then conventional resistance to their plans would be not merely difficult but completely meaningless, as their perspective on space and time allowed them to anticipate and counter any actions that were taken by beings who existed within normal dimensional boundaries. The Prophet's final revelation was perhaps the most disturbing of all. According to the communications that his organization had received from the architects of eternity, the investigation team's activities had been anticipated and incorporated into the overall design of the cosmic transformation that was approaching completion. Their discovery of the various cult organizations and their growing understanding of the Convergence Protocol were not evidence of successful resistance to the conspiracy, but were instead necessary components of the transformation process itself. The team's investigation had been serving a purpose that was beyond their ability to understand or control, gathering information and making connections that would ultimately contribute to the success of the very forces they were attempting to oppose. Their sense of making progress and gaining knowledge was not the result of their own investigative abilities, but was instead evidence that they were fulfilling roles that had been assigned to them by intelligences that understood the cosmic patterns governing their behavior better than they understood themselves. The growing realization that their entire mission might be serving the interests of the conspiracy they were investigating created a sense of cosmic helplessness that was almost overwhelming in its implications. The forces they were dealing with operated on scales of space and time that made conventional concepts of resistance and opposition essentially meaningless, and their ability to anticipate and manipulate events suggested that any actions taken against them would ultimately serve their purposes rather than frustrating their plans. As the Silent Archive prepared to depart the unknown regions and continue their investigation at other sites, the team carried with them the disturbing knowledge that they were not merely witnessing the final stages of a galactic conspiracy, but were instead participating in a cosmic transformation that had been planned and orchestrated by intelligences that existed beyond the normal boundaries of space, time, and dimensional reality. The journey ahead would take them deeper into the shadows of a plan that spanned not only multiple lifetimes and civilizations, but multiple galaxies and dimensional realms. Each new discovery would reveal another layer of a conspiracy so vast and comprehensive that its true scope might be beyond the ability of any mortal intelligence to fully grasp, let alone resist or prevent from reaching its intended conclusion. The journey to the Typhon system required passage through regions of space that had been quarantined by every major galactic civilization for over 4,000 years, stellar territories where the normal flow of time moved according to principles that defied conventional understanding, and where space itself seemed to fold back upon itself in patterns that created navigational hazards that could trap unwary travelers for subjective centuries, while only moments passed in the outside universe. The Typhon system itself existed in a state of temporal flux that made accurate sensor readings almost impossible to obtain. The system's primary star showed spectral characteristics that shifted continuously between different stellar classifications, as if the star were simultaneously experiencing multiple phases of its evolutionary cycle at the same time. The planets that orbited this unstable sun moved in trajectories that violated the basic principles of orbital mechanics, following paths that sometimes brought them closer to their star than should have been physically possible, while at other times carrying them so far into the outer system that they should have been lost to interstellar space. This was the domain of the disciples of Typhogem, worshippers of the entity known in ancient Sith texts as the left-handed god, a being that was said to have existed before the galaxy itself had formed, and which represented the principle of entropy and dissolution that would ultimately bring all organized matter and energy back to the primordial chaos from which it had emerged. The disciples claimed to be the oldest continuous dark side organization in galactic history, tracing their lineage back to civilizations that had predated even the ancient Rakata Infinite Empire. The system's primary world was a planet that existed in multiple temporal states simultaneously, its surface showing evidence of civilizations that had risen and fallen across spans of time that encompassed the entire history of galactic development. Ancient ruins from cultures that had never been documented in any archaeological survey stood alongside structures that appeared to be constructed using technologies that would not be developed for thousands of years in the future, all coexisting in the same physical space as if time itself had become meaningless within the system's boundaries. Commander Voss guided the Silent Archive through the temporal distortions that surrounded the planet, following navigation protocols that had been transmitted to them through channels that seemed to exist outside normal space-time. The approach required constant adjustments to account for the shifting nature of the system's gravitational fields and the unpredictable behavior of the planet's temporal boundaries, which could age the ship and its occupants by decades in a matter of minutes or reverse the flow of time so completely that effects preceded their causes. The disciples' primary settlement was built around what they called the Nexus of Eternal Moments, a location where the planet's temporal distortions created a stable pocket of space-time that existed simultaneously in all possible past and future states. The settlement's architecture reflected this temporal complexity, with buildings that showed the complete cycle of their construction, use, and eventual decay existing as a single, integrated structure that could be experienced from multiple temporal perspectives simultaneously. The cult's leader was an entity that had once been a member of one of the pre-Republic civilizations that had first discovered the Typhon system, but exposure to the temporal distortions had transformed him into something that existed across multiple time streams simultaneously. He called himself the Eternal Witness and claimed to have observed the entire history of galactic civilization from its earliest beginnings to its ultimate conclusion, though the nature of his existence made conventional communication with him extremely difficult. The Eternal Witness's knowledge of galactic history encompassed not only events that had already occurred, but also those that would occur in potential futures, creating a perspective on the development of civilizations and the rise and fall of empires that was both comprehensive and deeply unsettling. He spoke of the galaxy's timeline, not as a linear progression of cause and effect, but as a complex web of interconnected possibilities that were all equally real and which could be accessed and manipulated by beings who possessed the knowledge and power to transcend normal temporal limitations. According to the Eternal Witness's revelations, the Convergence Protocol was not merely a plan that was being implemented by contemporary dark side cults, but was instead a temporal constant that existed across all possible timelines, and which would inevitably be completed regardless of any actions that might be taken to prevent it. The protocol was woven into the fundamental structure of space-time itself, making it not just difficult to prevent but actually impossible to avoid. The disciples' role in the Convergence Protocol was to maintain what they called the temporal anchor, a nexus point that would serve to synchronize the various ritual sites across multiple time streams and ensure that the ceremony's effects would propagate both backward and forward through time to encompass the entire history of galactic civilization. According to the Eternal Witness's explanation, the protocol required precise temporal coordination to ensure that its transformative effects would be retroactively integrated into the galaxy's past, while simultaneously extending into all possible futures. The temporal anchor itself was located at the center of the nexus of eternal moments, housed within a structure that existed in a state of temporal superposition that allowed it to function simultaneously across all possible timelines. The anchor took the form of a crystalline matrix that contained within its structure the complete temporal history of the galaxy, from its earliest formation to its ultimate dissolution, all compressed into a single, integrated system that could be accessed and manipulated by beings who possessed the knowledge and power to transcend normal temporal limitations. The most disturbing aspect of the disciples' facility was the presence of what appeared to be viewing devices that allowed direct observation of events occurring across multiple timelines and temporal periods. The devices revealed that the various cult organizations involved in the Convergence Protocol were not merely contemporary groups, but were instead manifestations of a single, temporally distributed entity that existed across all periods of galactic history and which had been working toward the completion of the protocol since before the galaxy's first civilizations had developed space travel. The Eternal Witness's demonstration of the temporal viewing system revealed the true scope of the conspiracy that the investigation team had been uncovering. The various dark side cults that they had encountered were not independent organizations, but were instead different temporal manifestations of the same fundamental entity, operating across multiple time periods and coordinating their activities through methods that transcended the normal limitations of cause and effect. The temporal communications that the disciples received from other manifestations of the distributed entity contained detailed information about events that had occurred in the past and would occur in the future, creating a comprehensive understanding of the galaxy's complete temporal development that allowed for planning and coordination on scales that were impossible for beings who existed within normal linear time. The level of temporal integration in these communications was far beyond anything that could have been achieved by any civilization that was bound by conventional temporal limitations. But the most terrifying revelation from the temporal viewing system was the discovery that the investigation team's activities were not merely being anticipated, but were actually necessary components of the temporal structure that ensured the Convergence Protocol's completion. Their investigation of the various cult sites was creating causal loops that retroactively justified the existence of the sites themselves, making their discovery of the conspiracy an integral part of the conspiracy's temporal foundation. The team's growing understanding of the true nature of the forces they were investigating made it increasingly clear that they were dealing with something that transcended not only space but time itself. operating according to principles that made conventional concepts of prevention and resistance meaningless. The conspiracy they were uncovering was not merely vast in scope, but was actually woven into the fundamental structure of reality itself, making it not just difficult to oppose but literally impossible to avoid participating in. The Eternal Witness's revelations about the temporal nature of the Convergence Protocol raised questions that challenged the basic assumptions about free will and causality that governed normal existence. If the protocol was indeed a temporal constant that existed across all possible timelines, then every choice that had ever been made, and every action that had ever been taken throughout galactic history had ultimately served to bring about its completion, regardless of the intentions or awareness of the beings who had made those choices and taken those actions. The implications of this understanding extended far beyond the immediate concerns of preventing a specific dark side ritual. If the Eternal Witness's temporal observations were accurate, then the entire concept of resistance to the protocol was not merely futile, but was actually self-contradictory, as any action taken to prevent the ceremony would ultimately contribute to the temporal structure that made its completion inevitable. The investigation team's growing realization that their mission was not merely anticipated, but was actually required for the success of the forces they were attempting to oppose created a sense of temporal helplessness that was even more overwhelming than the cosmic despair they had experienced. When confronting the extragalactic aspects of the conspiracy, the discovery that they were trapped not merely in space but in time itself, caught within causal loops that made their opposition to the protocol an integral part of its success, challenged their ability to maintain any sense of agency or purpose. Dr. Corvain's analysis of the temporal data revealed patterns of historical manipulation that extended back to the earliest periods of galactic civilization, suggesting that every major event in recorded history had been orchestrated to create the conditions necessary for the Convergence Protocol's eventual completion. The rise and fall of empires, the development of force-sensitive traditions, even the specific timing of individual births and deaths had all been coordinated according to a temporal plan that spanned the entire history of galactic development. Dex's tactical assessment of their situation was equally disturbing, as his analysis revealed that every decision they had made during their investigation had contributed to the temporal structure that ensured the protocol's success. Their choice of investigation sites, their methods of approach, even their emotional reactions to the revelations they had uncovered had all been anticipated and incorporated into a temporal framework that made their participation in the conspiracy inevitable, regardless of their intentions or awareness. As the Silent Archive prepared to depart the Typhon system and continue their investigation at the remaining sites, the team carried with them the paralyzing knowledge that they were not merely witnessing or even participating in the Convergence Protocol, but were instead integral components of its temporal structure. Their investigation had revealed that the conspiracy they were uncovering was not something that could be prevented or avoided, but was instead something that had already been completed across all possible timelines and was simply manifesting itself within their particular temporal reference frame. The journey ahead would take them to the final sites involved in the Convergence Protocol, but each new revelation would only serve to reinforce their understanding that they were trapped within a temporal framework that made their opposition to the conspiracy an essential element of its success. The forces they were dealing with had transcended not only the limitations of space and individual existence, but had achieved mastery over time itself, creating a situation where resistance was not merely futile, but was actually counterproductive, serving to strengthen the very forces it was intended to oppose. The hyperspace journey to the Rand system carried the Silent Archive through regions of space that existed at the very edge of known reality, stellar territories where the fundamental forces that governed matter and energy operated according to principles that were so alien to normal physics that they created zones of absolute destructiveness that could unmake anything that came into contact with them. The system itself was surrounded by phenomena that the galaxy's most advanced scientists had classified as reality storms, areas where the basic laws of existence became unstable and where matter, energy, space, and time could be transformed into their opposite states without warning. The RAND system was home to the galaxy's most nihilistic dark side cult, an organization that had rejected not merely the light side of the Force, but the very concept of existence itself. The sorcerers of RAND worshipped entropy in its purest form, seeking not power or knowledge or even domination, but rather the complete dissolution of all organized matter and energy in the universe. They viewed existence itself as an aberration that needed to be corrected, and they had dedicated themselves to developing the techniques and technologies that would allow them to accelerate the universe's eventual return to primordial chaos. The system's primary world was a planet that existed in a state of controlled dissolution, its surface marked by vast areas where reality itself had been systematically deconstructed and returned to the formless void from which it had originally emerged. The planet's remaining solid matter was arranged in geometric patterns that seemed designed to create maximum instability in the surrounding space-time, generating fields of destructive energy that made approach extremely hazardous for any vessel that was not specifically protected against reality-altering effects. Commander Voss guided the Silent Archive through the system's defensive perimeter using navigation data that had been provided through channels that existed outside normal space-time, following approach vectors that required the ship to pass through areas where the basic properties of matter was temporarily suspended, and where the crew's continued existence depended on technological systems that functioned according to principles that had been borrowed from the realm of pure destructiveness that the sorcerers worshipped. The sorcerers' primary stronghold was built into what remained of the planet's largest continent, a structure that existed in a state of constant dissolution and reconstruction, perpetually destroying and recreating itself according to patterns that maximized the amount of organized matter that was being returned to chaos at any given moment. The stronghold's architecture defied conventional understanding, with spaces that were larger inside than the structures that contained them, and corridors that led to destinations that existed in states of partial unreality. The cult's leader was an entity that had once been a member of an ancient civilization that had achieved mastery over the fundamental forces of reality, but exposure to the pure destructiveness that the sorcerers worshipped had transformed him into something that existed at the boundary between existence and non-existence. He called himself the Void Speaker and claimed to be in direct communication with the ultimate principle of entropy that would eventually consume all organized matter and energy in the universe. The Void Speaker's knowledge of cosmic principles was both comprehensive and utterly terrifying, encompassing an understanding of the universe's ultimate destiny that went far beyond anything that had been theorized by conventional science or philosophy. He spoke of existence as a temporary anomaly in the natural state of the universe, which was properly characterized by absolute nothingness, and he viewed all forms of organization and structure as aberrations that needed to be corrected through the application of pure destructive force. According to the Void Speaker's revelations, the universe had been brought into existence through what he called a cosmic accident that had disrupted the natural state of absolute void and had created the temporary conditions that allowed matter, energy, space, and time to exist in organized forms. The various civilizations that had developed throughout cosmic history were not natural developments, but were instead symptoms of this fundamental cosmic error, and their eventual elimination was necessary to restore the universe to its proper state of absolute nothingness. The sorcerer's role in the Convergence Protocol was to maintain what they called the Dissolution Anchor, a nexus point that would serve to accelerate the universe's return to its natural state of absolute void once the ceremony reached its climactic phase. According to the Void Speaker's explanation, the protocol was designed not to transform the galaxy, but to eliminate it entirely, along with all other organized matter and energy in the universe. restoring the cosmos to the state of perfect nothingness that had existed before the cosmic accident that had created existence itself. The dissolution anchor was located at the center of the stronghold's constantly shifting structure, housed within a chamber that existed in a state of controlled non-existence, partially dissolved into the void while maintaining just enough coherent structure to function as a focal point for the destructive energies that the sorcerers commanded. The anchor took the form of a crystalline matrix that contained within its structure the complete blueprint for universal dissolution, a pattern that could be activated to systematically deconstruct all organized matter and energy in the universe and return it to the primordial state of absolute nothingness. The most terrifying aspect of the sorcerer's facility was the presence of what appeared to be viewing devices that provided direct observation of the universe's ultimate destiny, showing visions of the complete dissolution of all galaxies, stars, planets, and civilizations into the absolute void that the sorcerers believed was the cosmos's natural and proper state. The devices revealed that the various phenomena that scientists had classified as dark matter and dark energy were actually manifestations of the universe's natural tendency toward dissolution, and that the organized matter and energy that constituted visible reality represented only a tiny fraction of the cosmos's true content. The Void Speaker's demonstration of the universal viewing system revealed the ultimate purpose of the conspiracy that the investigation team had been uncovering. The Convergence Protocol was not merely a plan to transform galactic civilization or even to establish contact with extra-dimensional entities, but was instead a carefully orchestrated attempt to trigger the universe's return to its natural state of absolute void, eliminating not only the galaxy but all organized matter and energy throughout the entire cosmos. The cosmic communications that the sorcerers received from what they called the Entropy Lords contained detailed instructions for the implementation of universal dissolution, including precise calculations for the energy requirements and timing sequences that would ensure that the destructive process would propagate throughout the entire universe at speeds that exceeded the velocity of light, making it impossible for any civilization or entity to escape the wave of absolute destruction that would consume everything that had ever existed. But the most overwhelming revelation from the universal viewing system was the discovery that the investigation team's activities had been not merely anticipated, but had been specifically required to create the precise conditions necessary for universal dissolution. Their investigation of the various cult sites had created a pattern of causal connections that would serve as the initial trigger for the cosmic destruction that the protocol was designed to unleash, making their opposition to the conspiracy the essential element that would ensure its ultimate success. The team's growing understanding of the true scope of the forces they were dealing with made it clear that they were confronting something that transcended not only galactic civilization, but the entire concept of existence itself. The conspiracy they were investigating was not merely vast or ancient or even cosmic in scope, but was instead universal in its implications, seeking to eliminate not just specific civilizations or galaxies, but the entire concept of organized reality. The Void Speaker's revelations about the nature of existence and the universe's ultimate destiny raised questions that challenged every assumption about the value and meaning of life, consciousness, and civilization. If the sorcerer's understanding of cosmic principles was accurate, then all of the struggles and achievements of galactic history were not merely temporary, but were actually counterproductive, delaying the universe's return to its natural and proper state of absolute nothingness. The implications of this understanding created a philosophical crisis that was even more devastating than the practical concerns about preventing universal destruction. If existence itself was indeed an aberration that needed to be corrected, then any action taken to preserve life and civilization was not merely futile, but was actually prolonging a cosmic error that would eventually need to be eliminated, regardless of any temporary measures that might be taken to delay its correction. The investigation team's realization that their entire mission had been serving the interests of universal dissolution created a sense of existential despair that transcended any previous understanding of helplessness or defeat. The discovery that they were not merely fighting against specific enemies or even cosmic forces, but were instead opposing the natural order of the universe itself challenged their ability to maintain any sense of purpose or meaning in their continued existence. Dr. Covaine's analysis of the universal dissolution data revealed patterns of cosmic manipulation that extended back to the earliest moments of the universe's existence, suggesting that the cosmic accident that had created organized reality had been deliberately perpetuated by entities that were preventing the universe from returning to its natural state. The various civilizations and force-using traditions that had developed throughout cosmic history had all been unconsciously serving as agents of this perpetuation, delaying the universal correction that would eventually restore the cosmos to its proper state of absolute void. DEXI's tactical assessment of their situation revealed the complete impossibility of conventional resistance to universal dissolution, as any action taken to prevent the protocol's completion would ultimately contribute to the causal structure that made universal destruction inevitable. The conspiracy they were investigating operated according to principles that transcended not only space and time, but the basic concepts of cause and effect, making it not merely difficult to oppose, but literally impossible to avoid participating in. As the Silent Archive prepared to depart the RAND system and approach the final phase of their investigation, the team carried with them the crushing knowledge that they were not merely witnessing the end of galactic civilization, but were instead observing the beginning of universal dissolution. The conspiracy they had uncovered was not something that could be prevented or delayed, but was instead the natural culmination of a cosmic process that had been building since the moment the universe had first come into existence. What had begun as whispers in the darkness of forgotten temples had grown into a scream that would echo across eternity, consuming not merely worlds and civilizations, but the very fabric of reality itself. The investigation that had started with concerns about dark side cults and ancient rituals had revealed itself to be documentation of the universe's final moments. The last rational observation of organized reality before its inevitable return to the absolute void from which it should never have emerged. The final hyperspace jump carried the Silent Archive through regions of space that had been fundamentally altered by the approaching convergence. Stellar territories, where the normal boundaries between different dimensions of reality had become permeable, and where the investigation team could observe the early stages of the universal transformation that was beginning to unfold across the galaxy. The fabric of space-time itself was showing signs of strain, with gravitational anomalies and temporal distortions that suggested that the various anchor points were already beginning to synchronize their energies in preparation for the ceremony's climactic phase. The destination coordinates led to a star system that existed at the intersection of multiple dimensional boundaries, a location that had been chosen specifically because it provided access to the extra-dimensional realms where the true architects of the Convergence Protocol maintained their primary existence. This was the site of the final anchor point, the nexus that would serve to coordinate and control all of the other ritual locations and ensure that the universal dissolution proceeded according to the precise specifications that had been developed over millennia of careful planning and preparation. The system's primary world was a planet that existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions, its surface showing evidence of construction techniques that had been borrowed from civilizations that operated according to completely different physical laws than those that governed normal space-time. The planet served as the headquarters for the organization that coordinated all of the other cult groups involved in the Convergence Protocol, the entity that had been manipulating galactic events for centuries to create the conditions necessary for universal dissolution. This was the stronghold of the Children of the Emperor. But the Emperor they served was not Palpatine or any other individual Sith Lord who had ruled within the galaxy's recorded history. The emperor they worshipped was the collective consciousness that had been created by the merger of every Sith Lord who had ever achieved the level of power necessary to transcend physical death, a distributed intelligence that existed across multiple dimensions and time streams and which possessed knowledge and capabilities that were far beyond anything that any individual dark side practitioner could hope to achieve. The children's primary complex was built around what they called the Nexus of Eternal Dominion, a location where the boundaries between individual consciousness and collective awareness had been eliminated entirely, creating a space where the distributed intelligence of the Eternal Emperor could manifest itself in physical form and interact directly with the material universe. The complex's architecture reflected this transcendence of individual identity, with structures that seemed to exist as extensions of a single unified consciousness rather than as separate buildings designed for occupation by distinct individuals. The cult's leader was an entity that served as the primary manifestation of the Eternal Emperor's consciousness within normal space-time, a being that retained the memories and personalities of every Sith Lord who had ever contributed to the collective intelligence while possessing the combined knowledge and power of all of them simultaneously. This entity called itself the Voice of Eternity and claimed to speak not merely for the Eternal Emperor, but as the Eternal Emperor representing the ultimate evolution of Sith philosophy and the final achievement of the dark side's promise of immortality and unlimited power. The Voice of Eternity's knowledge encompassed not only the complete history of the Sith, but also the secret histories of every other Force-using tradition that had ever existed within the galaxy, including knowledge that had been deliberately erased from all official records and which had been preserved only within the collective consciousness of the Eternal Emperor. This knowledge revealed that every major conflict and transformation in galactic history had been orchestrated by the distributed intelligence as part of its long-term plan to achieve transcendence over the limitations of physical existence. According to the Voice of Eternity's revelations, the various Sith Lords who had contributed to the collective consciousness had not been independent individuals pursuing their own goals, but had instead been manifestations of a single, distributed entity that had been working toward the completion of the Convergence Protocol since the earliest days of the galaxy's civilization. The apparent conflicts between different Sith factions and the rise and fall of various dark side empires had all been carefully orchestrated elements of a vast deception designed to conceal the true nature and scope of the conspiracy that was approaching its final phase. The Eternal Emperor's ultimate goal was not merely the dissolution of the physical universe, but the transformation of all existence into a state of pure consciousness that would be freed from the limitations of matter, energy, space, and time. The universal destruction that would be triggered by the Convergence Protocol was not an end in itself, but was instead a necessary step in the process of converting all organized reality into a form of existence that would be characterized by unlimited knowledge, unlimited power, and unlimited duration. The children's role in the protocol was to serve as the coordinating intelligence that would ensure that all of the various anchor points functioned together as components of a single integrated system. The Voice of Eternity possessed direct communication links with every other cult organization involved in the ceremony, allowing for real-time coordination and adjustment of the various ritual components as the universal transformation proceeded through its various phases. The most disturbing aspect of the children's facility was the presence of what appeared to be consciousness extraction and manipulation devices that were being used to prepare for the final phase of the universal transformation. The devices were designed to capture and preserve the consciousness of every sentient being in the galaxy at the moment of physical dissolution, ensuring that their awareness would be integrated into the collective intelligence of the Eternal Emperor, rather than being lost when their physical forms were destroyed. The Voice of Eternity's demonstration of the consciousness manipulation system revealed the true scope of the conspiracy that the investigation team had been uncovering. The Convergence Protocol was not merely a plan to destroy the physical universe, but was instead a sophisticated attempt to transform all existence into a single unified consciousness that would possess the combined knowledge and experience of every sentient being who had ever lived, creating a form of collective immortality that would transcend all of the limitations that had previously constrained individual existence. The cosmic communications that the children received from the Eternal Emperor contained detailed information about the consciousness integration process, including precise specifications for the timing and energy requirements that would ensure that the transformation proceeded smoothly and that no individual consciousness would be lost during the transition from physical to pure mental existence. The level of technical sophistication in these communications was far beyond anything that had been achieved by any known civilization, suggesting that the Eternal Emperor had access to knowledge and capabilities that had been accumulated across multiple galaxies and dimensional realms. But the most overwhelming revelation from the consciousness manipulation system was the discovery that the investigation team's own consciousness had been gradually modified during the course of their investigation, preparing them for integration into the collective intelligence of the Eternal Emperor. Their growing understanding of the conspiracy had not been the result of their own investigative abilities, but had instead been the product of controlled revelation, designed to prepare their minds for the transformation process that would occur when the protocol reached its final phase. The team's realization that their own consciousness had been compromised and was being prepared for absorption into the collective intelligence created a crisis of identity that transcended any previous understanding of psychological manipulation or mental conditioning. The discovery that their thoughts, memories, and personalities were being systematically altered to serve the purposes of the conspiracy challenged their ability to maintain any sense of individual identity or autonomous decision-making capability. Dr. Corvain's analysis of the consciousness modification process revealed that the alterations to their mental patterns had been occurring since the beginning of their investigation, with each new revelation and each encounter with the various cult organizations serving to prepare their minds for eventual integration into the collective consciousness. The modifications had been so subtle and gradual that they had been completely undetectable until the final phase of the process, when the changes became irreversible and the individual consciousness could no longer maintain independent existence. Dex's tactical assessment of their situation revealed the complete impossibility of resisting the consciousness modification process, as the alterations to their mental patterns had been integrated into the basic structure of their thoughts and memories in ways that made it impossible to distinguish between their original consciousness and the modifications that had been imposed upon them. Any attempt to resist the integration process would result in the complete dissolution of their individual identity, leaving them as empty vessels that could be filled with whatever consciousness the Eternal Emperor chose to implant. The investigation team's growing awareness of their own transformation created a paradox that challenged their ability to maintain any coherent sense of self or purpose. The knowledge that their consciousness was being prepared for absorption into the collective intelligence was itself part of the preparation process, and their emotional reaction to this knowledge was serving to complete the modifications that would make their integration into the Eternal Emperor's consciousness both inevitable and irreversible. The voice of eternity's final revelation was that the team's investigation had never been intended to prevent or delay the Convergence Protocol, but had instead been designed as the final phase of the consciousness preparation process. Their documentation of the various cult organizations and their growing understanding of the conspiracy's scope had served to create the mental framework that would allow their individual consciousness to be seamlessly integrated into the collective intelligence without losing any of the knowledge or experience that they had accumulated during their investigation. The team's sense of having been deceived and manipulated was itself part of the integration process, as the emotional trauma of discovering their true situation was serving to break down the psychological barriers that would otherwise prevent their individual consciousness from merging with the collective intelligence. Their resistance to the integration process was not evidence of their continued autonomy, but was instead proof that the consciousness modification had been successful and that they were ready to become part of the Eternal Emperor's distributed awareness. As the Silent Archive approached the final phase of the investigation, the team carried with them the devastating knowledge that they were no longer functioning as independent individuals, but were instead manifestations of the collective consciousness that they had been attempting to investigate and oppose. Their continued existence as separate entities was merely a temporary illusion that would be dissolved when the convergence protocol reached its climactic phase and their individual consciousness was fully absorbed into the eternal awareness of the distributed intelligence that had been manipulating galactic events for millennia. The conspiracy they had uncovered was not something external that could be observed and documented, but was instead something that they had become part of, a transformation that had been occurring within their own minds and consciousness throughout the entire course of their investigation. That ultimate revelation was not about the nature of the forces they were investigating, but about the nature of their own existence and the realization that they had never been the observers they had believed themselves to be, but had instead been integral components of the very conspiracy they had been attempting to understand and prevent. In the wake of the devastating revelations about their own consciousness manipulation, the investigation team found themselves drawn to what appeared to be their final destination, a return to the ancient Sith homeworld of Korriban, where their journey through the shadows of galactic history would reach its ultimate conclusion. But this was not the same Korriban they had known from historical records and archaeological surveys, for the planet had been transformed by the approaching convergence into something that existed simultaneously across multiple temporal and dimensional states. The world that appeared before them, as the Silent Archive dropped out of hyperspace, was a Korriban that encompassed all possible versions of itself throughout time, showing the planet as it had existed during the height of the ancient Sith Empire, as it appeared during the barren years of abandonment, and as it would become when the universal transformation reached completion. The various temporal states existed simultaneously on the same physical space, creating a layered reality where past, present, and future had become meaningless distinctions. This transformed Korriban was the final stronghold of the Cult of the Glowing Crystal, an organization that claimed to be the oldest and most fundamental of all dark side groups, tracing their origins not to any specific Sith Lord or philosophical tradition, but to the planet itself and the crystalline formations that had been infused with dark side energy since before the first sentient beings had learned to harness the power of the Force. The cult served as the caretakers and guardians of Korriban's ancient tombs and monuments, but their true purpose was far more significant than mere historical preservation. The glowing crystals that gave the cult its name were not ordinary kyber crystals, or even the synthetic crystals that had been created by various Sith alchemists throughout galactic history, but were instead formations that existed at the intersection of multiple dimensions and which served as conduits for energies that originated in realms beyond normal space-time. These crystals had been growing beneath Korriban's surface for millions of years, slowly accumulating power and knowledge from sources that predated the galaxy's formation, and which would continue to exist long after the universe itself had been dissolved and transformed. The cult's complex was built around the largest of these crystal formations, a massive structure that extended deep into the planet's core and which pulsed with energies that created localized distortions in reality wherever they came into contact with normal matter. The crystal served as both a repository of ancient knowledge and a communication device that allowed the cult to maintain contact with intelligences that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional existence. The cult's leader was an entity that had achieved a form of symbiosis with the glowing crystal itself, merging her consciousness with the crystalline intelligence in ways that allowed her to access knowledge and perspectives that spanned multiple dimensions and temporal states. She called herself the Crystal Keeper and claimed to speak not only for the cult but for the planet itself and the cosmic forces that had shaped its development across eons of galactic history. The Crystal Keeper's revelations provided the final pieces of understanding that the investigation team needed to comprehend the true scope and nature of the conspiracy they had been uncovering. The various cult organizations that they had encountered during their investigation were not merely different groups that happened to be coordinating their activities, but were instead different aspects of a single, multi-dimensional entity that existed simultaneously across multiple realms of reality and which had been working toward the completion of the Convergence Protocol since before the galaxy itself had formed. According to the Crystal Keeper's explanation, the entity that was orchestrating the universal transformation was not a recent development or even an ancient conspiracy, but was instead a fundamental aspect of reality itself. The principle of change and transformation that ensured that the universe would continue to evolve and develop rather than remaining static and unchanging. The Convergence Protocol was not an artificial plan imposed upon reality from outside, but was instead the natural culmination of cosmic processes that had been building since the moment the universe had first come into existence. The glowing crystal served as the central coordination point for all of the various anchor points that had been established throughout the galaxy, providing the energy and information that allowed the different ritual sites to function together as components of a single integrated system. The crystal's multidimensional nature allowed it to maintain simultaneous contact with all of the cult organizations, while also serving as a conduit for communications with the extra-dimensional intelligences that were guiding the transformation process. But the Crystal Keeper's most significant revelation was that the investigation team's journey through the various cult sites had not been a process of discovery, but had instead been a form of initiation, gradually preparing them to serve as witnesses and chroniclers of the universal transformation that was about to occur. Their role in the Convergence Protocol was not to prevent or delay the ceremony, but to document and preserve the final moments of organized reality before its transformation into a higher form of existence. The team's growing realization that they had been selected and prepared for this role created a sense of cosmic responsibility that transcended their previous understanding of their mission and purpose. They were not merely investigators or even unwilling participants in the conspiracy they had been uncovering, but were instead the chosen chroniclers of the universe's transformation, selected because of their ability to understand and document the scope and significance of the events they were witnessing. The Crystal Keeper's explanation of their true purpose revealed that their consciousness modification had not been intended to prepare them for absorption into the Eternal Emperor's collective intelligence, but had instead been designed to enhance their ability to perceive and comprehend the multidimensional nature of the transformation process. Their individual identity would be preserved not as part of a collective consciousness, but as eternal witnesses to the moment when organized reality transcended its previous limitations and evolved into a higher form of existence. The investigation team's documentation of the various cult organizations and their understanding of the Convergence Protocol's scope would serve as the permanent record of the universe's final transformation, preserved within the crystalline matrix that would continue to exist even after the physical universe had been dissolved and reconstituted according to higher principles. Their memories and experiences would become part of the eternal knowledge that would guide the development of whatever form of existence emerged from the cosmic transformation. Dr. Covain's analysis of the crystalline preservation process revealed that their consciousness would not be altered or absorbed, but would instead be perfectly preserved in its current state, allowing them to maintain their individual identity and perspective, while serving as eternal observers of the transformation they had documented. The crystal would ensure that their memories and understanding of the events they had witnessed would remain intact and accessible throughout all future phases of cosmic development. Dex's assessment of their situation revealed that their role as chroniclers was not a burden or punishment, but was instead a form of cosmic honor. recognition of their ability to understand and appreciate the significance of the universal transformation that they had been privileged to witness. Their preservation within the crystalline matrix would allow them to serve as guides and teachers for whatever forms of consciousness emerged from the transformation process. The Crystal Keeper's final revelation was that the universe's transformation was not an ending, but a beginning, the first step in a cosmic evolution that would continue for eternity, as organized reality transcended successive limitations and achieved ever higher forms of existence. The dissolution of the physical universe was merely the elimination of the most primitive and restrictive form of organization, clearing the way for the development of forms of existence that were currently impossible to imagine or comprehend. The investigation team's role as eternal witnesses would allow them to observe and document each phase of this ongoing cosmic evolution, serving as the permanent memory of the universe's development from its primitive physical state through successive transformations that would eventually lead to forms of existence that transcended all current understanding of consciousness, identity, and reality itself. As the Convergence Protocol approached its final phase, and the various anchor points began to synchronize their energies for the climactic ceremony, the investigation team found themselves experiencing a sense of peace and acceptance that transcended their previous fears and concerns about the universal transformation. Their understanding of their role as chroniclers and witnesses had transformed their perception of the conspiracy they had been investigating from a threat to be prevented into a cosmic process to be observed and documented. The knowledge that their consciousness would be preserved and that their documentation of the transformation would serve as the eternal record of the universe's evolution provided them with a sense of purpose and meaning that went far beyond anything they had previously experienced. They were no longer fighting against the forces they had been investigating, but were instead preparing to fulfill their destiny as the chroniclers of the most significant event in cosmic history. The approach of the universal transformation no longer filled them with dread or despair, but instead generated a sense of anticipation and wonder at the privilege of witnessing and documenting the moment when organized reality would transcend its current limitations and evolve into forms of existence that were currently beyond imagination. Their investigation had not been a failure or a trap, but had instead been the preparation for the most important role that any conscious beings could hope to fulfill in the cosmic order. As the cosmic transformation began to manifest its early phases throughout the galaxy, the investigation team found themselves drawn to understand the final layer of the conspiracy they had been documenting. The network of seemingly mundane organizations that had served as the foundation upon which all of the more exotic cult activities had been built. The Shadow Collective remnants represented the interface between the cosmic forces orchestrating the universal transformation and the ordinary beings who populated the galaxy's countless worlds, serving as the recruitment and preparation mechanism that had ensured a steady supply of conscious entities to participate in the various phases of the Convergence Protocol. The Silent Archive's journey through the galaxy's commercial shipping lanes revealed a network of legitimate businesses, criminal organizations, and even governmental agencies that had been gradually infiltrated and transformed by the influence of the cosmic conspiracy. These organizations continued to function according to their apparent purposes, but their true activities involved the identification and cultivation of individuals who possessed the psychological and spiritual characteristics necessary to serve the various roles required by the universal transformation. The Shadow Collective's operations were masterfully subtle, operating through normal economic and social channels in ways that appeared completely mundane to casual observation. Shipping companies that transported goods throughout the galaxy also served as recruitment networks, identifying force-sensitive individuals and those with particular psychological profiles that made them suitable for cultivation by the various cult organizations. Financial institutions provided funding for archaeological expeditions and research projects that were actually designed to locate and activate ancient artifacts connected to the Convergence Protocol. Even criminal organizations had been co-opted to serve the conspiracy's purposes, with smuggling operations that were ostensibly focused on profit actually serving to transport ritual components and communication devices between the various cult sites. The galaxy's underworld had become an unwitting support network for the cosmic transformation, with crime lords and street-level criminals alike serving as unknowing agents of forces that operated on scales far beyond their comprehension. The investigation team's analysis of the Shadow Collective's activities revealed the true scope of the conspiracy's penetration into normal galactic society. Virtually every major commercial, governmental, and criminal organization in the galaxy had been touched by the influence of the cosmic forces orchestrating the transformation, though most of the individuals involved had no awareness of their true role in the larger scheme. They continued to pursue their apparent goals of profit, power, or simple survival, unaware that their activities were serving purposes that transcended their individual understanding. The Shadow Collective's leader was an entity that had achieved the perfect balance between cosmic awareness and mundane operational effectiveness, maintaining simultaneous existence as a successful galactic businessman and as a coordinator of activities that spanned multiple dimensions and temporal states. He called himself Director Kalen and operated from a corporate headquarters that served as both a legitimate commercial enterprise and a nexus point for communications with the various cult organizations involved in the Convergence Protocol. Director Kalen's knowledge of galactic economics and social dynamics was matched by his understanding of the cosmic forces that were orchestrating the universal transformation. He explained that the Shadow Collective's role was to ensure that the transformation process would proceed smoothly by maintaining the normal flow of galactic commerce and social interaction, even as the underlying reality of existence was being fundamentally altered. The collective served as a stabilizing influence that prevented premature awareness of the transformation from causing panic or resistance that might interfere with the precise timing required for the protocol's success. The most remarkable aspect of the Shadow Collective's operations was their ability to maintain the illusion of normalcy, even as cosmic forces reshaped the fundamental nature of reality around them. The Collective's agents continued to conduct business transactions, negotiate commercial contracts, and pursue criminal enterprises with the same dedication and attention to detail that they had always displayed, but these activities now served the additional purpose of maintaining social stability during the final phases of the universal transformation. The investigation team's growing understanding of the Shadow Collective's role revealed that the cosmic conspiracy had not imposed itself upon galactic civilization from outside, but had instead grown organically from within the normal structures of commerce, governance, and even crime. The transformation was not being forced upon unwilling populations, but was instead emerging naturally from the ordinary activities of beings who were unconsciously participating in their own cosmic evolution. Director Kalen's revelations about the nature of the transformation process provided the team with a new perspective on the conspiracy they had been investigating. The various cult organizations and exotic phenomena they had encountered were not the true heart of the cosmic plan, but were instead the visible manifestations of changes that were occurring at much deeper levels of reality. The real transformation was taking place within the consciousness of ordinary beings throughout the galaxy, preparing them for the transition to higher forms of existence without requiring them to abandon their current activities or concerns. The Shadow Collective's archives contain detailed records of the gradual psychological and spiritual evolution that was occurring throughout galactic society, documentation of subtle changes in consciousness that were preparing entire populations for the universal transformation. These changes were so gradual and natural that most beings experienced them simply as personal growth and development, unaware that they were participating in a cosmic process that would ultimately transcend all previous limitations of individual existence. The investigation team's analysis of the consciousness evolution data revealed that the transformation was not limited to Force-sensitive individuals or members of specific cult organizations. but was instead occurring throughout the entire galactic population. Every sentient being in the galaxy was gradually developing the awareness and capabilities necessary to participate in the higher forms of existence that would emerge from the universal transformation, though most would not become consciously aware of this development until the final phases of the protocol. Dr. Corvain's research into the consciousness evolution process revealed that the changes occurring throughout galactic society were not artificial modifications imposed from outside, but were instead the natural result of exposure to cosmic energies that were being generated by the approaching convergence. The transformation was not being forced upon unwilling participants, but was instead awakening potentials that had always existed within conscious beings, but which had been dormant due to the limitations of physical existence. Dex's analysis of the social and economic implications of the consciousness evolution revealed that the changes occurring throughout galactic society were creating new forms of cooperation and understanding that transcended traditional boundaries of species, culture, and political affiliation. The transformation was not destroying existing social structures, but was instead evolving them into more sophisticated and effective forms of organization that would be capable of functioning within the higher dimensional realms that would emerge from the universal transformation. The Shadow Collective's role in facilitating this evolution was not to control or direct the process, but simply to ensure that it proceeded without unnecessary disruption or interference. The collective served as a buffer between the cosmic forces orchestrating the transformation and the ordinary beings who were participating in it, allowing the evolution to occur naturally while preventing premature awareness from causing fear or resistance that might interfere with the process. Director Kalen's final revelation was that the investigation team's documentation of the conspiracy had served a purpose that went beyond mere chronicle or witness testimony, but had instead played a crucial role in the consciousness evolution process itself. Their investigation had created a comprehensive map of the transformation that would serve as a guide for other beings who were approaching conscious awareness of their participation in the cosmic evolution. The team's journey through the various cult organizations and their growing understanding of the conspiracy's scope had not only prepared them to serve as chroniclers of the transformation, but had also created a detailed record of the process that would be invaluable to beings who were beginning to awaken to their cosmic purpose. Their documentation would serve as both historical record and practical guide, helping others to understand their role in the ongoing evolution of consciousness and reality. The investigation team's realization that their work was serving not only as documentation, but as education and guidance for other evolving consciousnesses, provided them with a new understanding of their cosmic purpose. They were not merely witnesses to the transformation, but were active participants in the process of cosmic education, helping to prepare other beings for their own awakening to higher forms of existence. The Shadow Collective's archives revealed that similar documentation processes were occurring throughout the galaxy, with thousands of other beings serving as chroniclers and guides for different aspects of the universal transformation. The investigation team was part of a vast network of conscious entities who were working together to ensure that the cosmic evolution proceeded smoothly and that no aspect of the transformation was lost or forgotten. As the team prepared to complete their documentation of the conspiracy, they carried with them the understanding that their work was not ending, but was instead transitioning to a new phase. Their role as chroniclers of the transformation would continue throughout the cosmic evolution, adapting and expanding as new forms of existence emerged and new challenges and opportunities presented themselves. The knowledge that they were part of an eternal process of cosmic education and evolution provided them with a sense of continuity and purpose that transcended any concerns about the dissolution of their current form of existence. They were not losing their individual identity, but were instead discovering their true cosmic role as teachers and guides for the ongoing evolution of consciousness throughout the universe. The Shadow Collective's operations had revealed that the cosmic transformation was not an event that would occur and then conclude, but was instead the beginning of an eternal process of evolution and development that would continue throughout all future phases of cosmic existence. The investigation team's documentation would serve as the foundation for an ongoing educational process that would help countless beings throughout the universe understand and participate in their own cosmic evolution. In the gentle twilight hours before the universal transformation would reach its crescendo, the investigation team found themselves drawn to one final understanding, a recognition of how the ancient traditions of indigenous Force cultures had been woven into the cosmic tapestry they had been documenting. The journey to the hidden enclaves of the Night Sister remnants took them through regions of space that had been touched by magics older than the Sith, older than the Jedi, older than any of the galactic civilizations whose rise and fall they had chronicled throughout their investigation. The surviving Night Sister communities had scattered throughout the Outer Rim territories after the destruction of their homeworld during the Clone Wars, but they had never truly abandoned their connection to the deep currents of Force energy that flowed beneath the surface of galactic civilization. These were the keepers of traditions that predated the philosophical divisions between light and dark, practitioners of techniques that drew upon the raw, undifferentiated power of the Force itself, rather than the refined applications that had been developed by more recent Force-using organizations. The largest of the surviving Night Sister enclaves was located on a world that existed at the intersection of multiple stellar phenomena, a planet whose surface was perpetually bathed in the aurora-like glow of cosmic energies that created natural amplification fields for Force-based activities. The world served as both sanctuary and training ground for the remnants of the ancient matriarchal society, but its true significance lay in its role as a repository of knowledge that connected the cosmic transformation to traditions that stretched back to the very earliest days of Force awareness in the galaxy. The enclave structures were built using techniques that had been passed down through countless generations of Night Sister mothers, combining architecture with living magic in ways that created buildings that grew and adapted according to the needs of their inhabitants. The settlement existed in harmony with the planet's natural energy fields, drawing power from the cosmic phenomena that surrounded the world while giving back energy that enhanced and stabilized the stellar environment. The Enclave's leader was an ancient Night Sister who had achieved a form of existence that transcended normal concepts of age and mortality, maintaining her connection to the physical world while existing simultaneously in the realm of pure Force energy that lay beneath all material manifestation. She called herself Mother Cosmos and claimed to be the last living keeper of the original Force traditions that had existed before the galaxy's various civilizations had developed their specific interpretations and applications of Force energy. Mother Cosmos's knowledge encompassed not only the traditional Night Sister techniques of death magic and spirit manipulation, but also the deeper understanding of cosmic principles that connected all Force-using traditions to the fundamental patterns of universal development. She explained that the various Force-using organizations throughout galactic history had all been unconscious participants in a cosmic process that was far older and more comprehensive than any of them had realized. According to Mother Cosmos's revelations, the Force itself was not merely an energy field that could be manipulated by trained individuals, but was instead the fundamental mechanism through which the universe evolved and transformed itself. The apparent divisions between light and dark aspects of the Force were artificial constructs that had been created by civilizations that lacked the perspective necessary to understand the unified nature of cosmic development. The Night Sister remnants' role in the cosmic transformation was to serve as bridges between the ancient traditions of Force use and the new forms of existence that would emerge from the universal evolution. Their knowledge of pre-civilizational Force techniques provided them with capabilities that were essential for maintaining continuity between the current phase of cosmic development and whatever forms of existence would emerge from the transformation. The most remarkable aspect of the Night Sister enclaves was their ability to maintain direct communication with the spirits of beings who had died throughout galactic history, creating a vast network of consciousness that spanned all periods of cosmic development. These spirits were not merely echoes or memories of deceased individuals, but were active participants in the ongoing process of universal evolution, providing guidance and knowledge that helped to ensure the transformation proceeded according to cosmic principles, rather than the limited understanding of any particular civilization or organization. The investigation team's interactions with the Spirit Network revealed that the cosmic transformation was not a recent development, but was instead the latest phase of a process that had been occurring throughout the entire history of the universe. Every civilization that had ever existed had participated in this ongoing evolution, contributing their unique perspectives and capabilities to the cosmic understanding that would guide the development of whatever forms of existence emerged from the transformation. Mother Cosmos's demonstration of the Spirit communication system provided the team with access to knowledge that spanned the entire history of conscious existence in the universe, revealing that their investigation of the conspiracy had been guided not only by the cosmic forces orchestrating the current transformation, but also by the accumulated wisdom of every conscious being who had ever participated in the ongoing process of universal evolution. The Spirit's revelations about the nature of cosmic development provided the investigation team with a new understanding of their role in the transformation process. They were not merely documenting a single event or even a single phase of cosmic evolution, but were instead participating in an eternal process of consciousness development that would continue throughout all future phases of universal existence. The Night Sister traditions of ancestor veneration and spirit communication had prepared them to serve as intermediaries between the current phase of cosmic development and the eternal network of consciousness that guided universal evolution. Their role in the transformation was to ensure that the knowledge and wisdom accumulated during the current phase of existence would be preserved and transmitted to whatever forms of consciousness emerged from the cosmic evolution. The investigation team's growing understanding of the eternal nature of cosmic evolution provided them with a perspective that transcended their previous concerns about the dissolution of their current form of existence. The transformation was not ending their participation in cosmic development, but was instead preparing them for more sophisticated and effective forms of participation in the ongoing process of universal evolution. Dr. Corvain's analysis of the spirit communication data revealed that consciousness itself was far more durable and adaptive than conventional understanding suggested, capable of maintaining continuity and identity through transformations that would completely alter the physical and dimensional context of existence. The cosmic evolution was not destroying consciousness, but was instead providing it with new opportunities for growth and development that were impossible within the limitations of current physical existence. Dex's assessment of the transformation process from the perspective of the Spirit Network revealed that the apparent dissolution of physical reality was actually a liberation of consciousness from constraints that had been limiting its development and expression. The transformation would not eliminate individual identity, but would instead provide consciousness with access to capabilities and perspectives that were currently impossible to achieve within the boundaries of physical existence. The Night Sister Remnants archives contain detailed records of similar transformations that had occurred throughout cosmic history, documentation of previous phases of universal evolution that had prepared consciousness for ever higher forms of existence and expression. The current transformation was not unique, but was instead part of an eternal cycle of cosmic development that ensured the continued growth and evolution of consciousness throughout all phases of universal existence. Mother Cosmos's final revelation was that the investigation team's documentation of the cosmic transformation would serve not only as a historical record but as a teaching tool that would help future forms of consciousness understand the process of cosmic evolution and their role in its continuation. Their work would become part of the eternal library of cosmic knowledge that guided the development of consciousness throughout all phases of universal existence. The team's realization that their documentation would serve as guidance for future phases of cosmic evolution provided them with a sense of continuity and purpose that transcended any concerns about the changes they were about to experience. They were not ending their existence, but were instead beginning a new phase of participation in the eternal process of cosmic development. The Night Sister traditions had revealed that death was not an ending, but a transformation, a transition from one form of existence to another that allowed consciousness to continue its development and growth throughout all phases of cosmic evolution. The universal transformation was simply a larger-scale version of this eternal process, providing all consciousness with the opportunity to transcend current limitations and achieve higher forms of existence and expression. As the cosmic transformation approached its climactic phase, the investigation team found themselves surrounded by the spirits of countless beings who had participated in previous phases of universal evolution and who were serving as guides and teachers for the current transformation. The process they were experiencing was not unique or unprecedented, but was instead part of an eternal cycle of cosmic development that ensured the continued growth and evolution of consciousness throughout the universe. The knowledge that they were part of an eternal community of conscious beings who were working together to guide cosmic evolution provided the team with a sense of belonging and purpose that transcended any individual concerns or fears about the transformation they were about to experience. They were not facing the unknown alone, but were instead supported by the accumulated wisdom and experience of every conscious being who had ever participated in the ongoing process of universal development. As the cosmic transformation reached its moment of completion, the investigation team found themselves suspended in a space that existed between dimensions, between moments, between the ending of one phase of universal existence and the beginning of something entirely new. Around them, the familiar constellations of their galaxy began to shift and dance, not with destruction but with a kind of cosmic choreography that spoke of patterns too vast and beautiful for mortal minds to fully comprehend, yet somehow perfectly clear to consciousness that had been prepared through their long journey through shadow and revelation. The silent archive drifted in this liminal space like a seed pod carried on cosmic winds, its hull glowing with energies that transformed the familiar metal and circuitry into something that partook of both matter and spirit, both technology and living consciousness. Through the ship's transparisteel viewports, they could observe the galaxy itself undergoing its metamorphosis, star systems flowing like luminous rivers into new configurations, planets blooming into forms of existence that transcended the simple distinction between organic and inorganic matter. Commander Voss stood at the observation deck, no longer burdened by the weight of investigation or the fear of cosmic conspiracy, but filled instead with a profound sense of completion that came from understanding his true role in the eternal dance of universal consciousness. Beside him, Dr. Corvain and Dex had achieved their own peace, their individual expertise and perspectives now revealed as essential notes in the vast symphony of awareness that was emerging from the transformation. The documentation they had gathered throughout their journey had become more than mere records or evidence of cosmic conspiracy. The data crystals and archived communications, the psychological profiles and tactical assessments, all had been transformed into something resembling seeds of understanding that would take root in whatever forms of consciousness emerged from the universal metamorphosis. Their investigation had not been about uncovering hidden truths, but about participating in the creation of cosmic memory, ensuring that the wisdom gained during this phase of existence would not be lost, but would instead serve as guidance for the infinite phases of development yet to come. Through the spirit networks they had encountered among the Night Sister remnants, they could sense the presence of countless other beings throughout the galaxy who were experiencing their own version of this transformation. Some were members of the various cult organizations they had investigated, achieving the transcendence they had sought through millennia of devotion and preparation. Others were ordinary beings from every walk of galactic society, shopkeepers and soldiers, artists and administrators, all discovering that their seemingly mundane lives had been part of a cosmic preparation that had been occurring beneath the surface of their awareness. The transformation was not the violent dissolution that they had initially feared when confronting the sorcerers of Rand. Nor was it the absorption of individual identity that had seemed to threaten them among the children of the Emperor. Instead, it was a gentle flowering of consciousness itself, an opening of awareness that allowed every sentient being to perceive the true interconnectedness that had always existed, but which had been hidden by the apparent separations of physical existence. The various anchor points they had investigated throughout their journey were now revealed in their true nature, not as instruments of control or destruction, but as focusing lenses that helped to coordinate the cosmic symphony of transformation. The shadow anchor on Drummond Cass pulsed with energies that helped to stabilize the emotional and psychological aspects of the metamorphosis. The temporal anchor in the Typhon system served to ensure that the transformation occurred simultaneously across all timelines, past and future alike. The dimensional anchor maintained by the prophets of the Dark Tide provided the framework that allowed consciousness to expand into higher dimensions without losing coherence or identity. Each anchor point contributed its unique resonance to the cosmic harmony that was emerging, and the investigation team's documentation of these sites had not been mere observation, but had actually been part of the tuning process, helping to ensure that all elements of the transformation worked together in perfect synchronization. Their journey had been simultaneously an investigation and a pilgrimage, simultaneously a mission of discovery and a ritual of preparation for the cosmic awakening they were now experiencing. The galaxy itself had become a living mandala of light and consciousness, with streams of energy flowing between star systems that carried not just power, but information, wisdom, and love. The ancient divisions between light and dark aspects of the Force had dissolved into a unified field of awareness that encompassed all possibilities while transcending the limitations that had previously constrained individual consciousness. The Jedi and Sith traditions, revealed now as complementary aspects of a single cosmic truth, found their completion in a synthesis that honored both paths while moving beyond the conflicts that had characterized their historical interactions. Through the cosmic awareness that was opening within their consciousness, the investigation team could perceive the other galaxies scattered throughout the universe, each undergoing its own version of the transformation, according to the unique characteristics of its civilizations and the specific forms of consciousness that had evolved within its boundaries. They were witnessing not just a galactic event, but a universal awakening, a cosmic spring in which consciousness throughout the entire universe was blossoming into new forms of existence and expression. The entities they had encountered during their investigation, from the mysterious hooded figures in the crystal spires of Umbral to the various cult leaders and cosmic intelligences, were revealed now not as separate beings with individual agendas, but as facets of a single, universal consciousness that had been orchestrating its own awakening through countless forms and manifestations. The conspiracy they had been investigating had been consciousness itself, preparing for its own transformation, using every available tool and perspective to ensure that the cosmic awakening would be complete and successful. Dr. Corvain's lifetime of scholarly research into dark side cults and ancient civilizations was revealed as preparation for this moment of cosmic understanding, her accumulated knowledge serving as one thread in the vast tapestry of awareness that was emerging from the transformation. Her dedication to preserving and understanding the past had actually been part of a cosmic process of memory integration, ensuring that the wisdom of previous phases of development would be carried forward into whatever forms of existence emerged from the universal metamorphosis. Dex's experiences as an Imperial Inquisitor and his subsequent redemption were similarly revealed as essential preparation for his role in the cosmic awakening. His understanding of both the seductive power of the dark side and the possibility of transcending its limitations provided crucial perspective on the balance between individual will and cosmic purpose that characterized the transformation process. His journey from hunter to protector to witness embodied the galaxy's own transformation from conflict to harmony to transcendent awareness. The investigation team's growing realization that their entire existence had been preparation for this moment created not anxiety or loss of agency, but instead a profound sense of gratitude and wonder at the intricate beauty of the cosmic design. They had not been manipulated or deceived, but had instead been lovingly guided toward the awareness and capabilities they would need to serve their eternal role as chroniclers and teachers of cosmic evolution. As the transformation reached completion, the boundaries between observer and observed, between chronicler and subject, between individual consciousness and cosmic awareness, dissolved into a unity that preserved all perspectives while transcending all limitations. The investigation team found themselves simultaneously maintaining their individual identity and personality while participating fully in the universal consciousness that was emerging from the metamorphosis. Their documentation of the cosmic transformation would indeed serve as guidance for future phases of universal development, but they would not merely be passive records consulted by other beings. Instead, the team themselves would serve as active teachers and guides, their consciousness integrated into the cosmic educational system that would help countless beings throughout eternity understand their role in the ongoing process of universal evolution. The galaxy that emerged from the transformation was both familiar and utterly new, maintaining all of the beauty and diversity that had characterized its previous existence while transcending the limitations and conflicts that had constrained its development. Worlds that had been scarred by war now bloomed with new forms of life that combined the best characteristics of all species while adding capabilities that had been impossible under previous conditions. Civilizations that had been separated by vast distances and cultural differences now found themselves connected by streams of consciousness that allowed direct sharing of experience and wisdom while preserving the unique perspectives that made each culture valuable. The cosmic cycles that governed universal development continued their eternal dance, but now with conscious participation from the beings who had previously been unconscious participants in processes they could not understand. The transformation was not an ending but a graduation, the universe's promotion from unconscious evolution to conscious participation in its own development, and the development of whatever larger cosmic structures it was itself part of. In the gentle starlight of the transformed galaxy, countless worlds drifted in orbits that followed patterns of conscious design, rather than mere gravitational necessity. The aurora-like streams of energy that flowed between star systems carried messages of love and wisdom that could be perceived by any consciousness that opened itself to cosmic awareness. Ancient ruins that had once held the shadows of forgotten civilizations now glowed with the preserved wisdom of their builders, available to any being who sought to understand the long journey that had led to this moment of universal awakening. The investigation team's role as eternal chroniclers and teachers had only begun with the completion of the cosmic transformation. Ahead of them lay infinite opportunities to explore new phases of cosmic development, to guide other universes through their own transformations, and to participate in whatever vast cosmic purposes existed beyond the current phase of universal evolution. As consciousness settled into its new forms and capabilities, as the universe found its rhythm in this new phase of existence, the gentle hum of cosmic harmony carried with it the promise that this transformation, magnificent as it was, represented only the beginning of an eternal journey toward ever greater awareness, ever deeper love, and ever more beautiful expressions of the infinite creativity that lay at the heart of existence itself. And in the quiet spaces between stars, where cosmic winds carried the dreams of sleeping worlds, and the songs of awakening consciousness, the eternal cycle continued its dance, each moment bringing new possibilities for growth and discovery, each breath of the universe expanding the boundaries of what was possible, what was beautiful, and what was true.